If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back, episode number 4. There are many more to come and we're grateful for that. We have a paratrooper general here with us, McGill Alexander. Sir, thank you for your time once again. Thank you for the effort you take, to talk to us. We know it takes a lot of your time, but we're most grateful. I think so. We're now at the time where you finished with the military academy and now you're going back to one Parachute Battalion. You've got your red or your maroon beret back. You won that battle, and now it's over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, it's an interesting phase of my career that I embarked on at that point. I was very pleased to have been able to go back to one paraben. Obviously, that's what I really wanted. More than anything else, I wanted to get back to one Parachute Battalion, and I was sort of half under the impression that that might not happen, but I was very pleased when the signal finally came, and I was informed that I'm to report to one Parachute Battalion. So this was in November 1978. And I think it's important as I go into this that I just say that at this stage when I joined up, I was already not really 10 years behind, but I was 10 years older than many other people in my sort of rank field. I'd certainly lost at least 5 years of courses and various other qualifications that I was supposed to undertake. So it was a huge decision to make, to go to the academy, and it was a little worrying because I knew that I was now going to be even further back. So I arrived back at one Parachute Battalion in November 1978, and I was now another 3 years behind in terms of courses and things that I would have to do to catch up. I was still a lieutenant. I was little knowing that I was about to embark on a period which was filled with excitement, was extremely demanding in terms of my effort and my time, and which one of the aspects which I had no idea was going to happen. In fact, I was quite naive in terms of what was waiting for me. I thought that I would be able to go back to one paraben, perhaps be appointed as a company 2IC, start off training some people, perhaps bring in a new intake which was due in January and training them, spending a year finding my feet and getting things sorted out, and maybe the approximately 6 weeks to 2 months of the year that was left, I would be able to spend that time arranging for accommodation for my wife and getting things sorted out and so on. It was a vain hope on my part. It was absolutely naive to think like that. What I didn't know was that for the next 4 years, I would only see my wife a total of 18 months. That's all the time I spent at home. For the rest, I was either on course, deployed operationally, or doing various other tasks that came my way. Much of the time was spent operationally, deployed operationally. So when I say I was spent 18 months at home, that wasn't an 18-month stretch. That was 3 weeks here and sometimes 2 days there, and then maybe a month or two. And at one stage, I had a new company to train, and I thought, now it's but the courses still kept coming, I was down at the infantry school in Oudtshoorn and later at the army battle school in Loatla, and it was a very, very hectic time, and it was very demanding for my wife as well. She had no idea that this is what was waiting for her. But it was a time of opportunity for me, wonderful opportunity. It was a time of preparation. I was able to build myself up and prepare myself and gain a lot of the experience that I didn't have before that. It's interesting. I read an interesting thing this morning when I was holding my quiet time, and it was a reference to the Roman philosopher Seneca, something that he said. And he said, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And in a sense, when I thought about that, I thought, well, you know, that applied to me in many ways. I was determined to prepare myself, and when the opportunities came, then I was able to take those opportunities. So it's not really luck; it's the preparation that gave you the means to grasp the opportunity and do something about it. I believe it was Gary Player who said, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. And that's essentially what Seneca was saying. So you know, there's no easy way. There's no way of saying, oh, you know, he just fell with his bum in the butter. There's no easy way. You've got to work to get where you want to go, and for the next 5 or 6 years, no, for the next 7 years, I had to work extremely hard. But it was possibly the most stimulating. Maybe there was a more stimulating time coming when I went to 44 Para Brigade, but certainly the time at 1 Paraben was highly stimulating for me. So when I returned to 1 Paraben, I had to leave my wife behind because I didn't have a house to go to or anything like that. So she now had 2 little girls, and she stayed behind in Vredenburg. And she would have to, I was hoping I'd be able to go back and help her pack up, and, you know, we could bring everything up once I'd got things sorted out in Bloemfontein. And I left my car with her, and I went up by train, and I arrived in Bloemfontein, and I went to the battalion and dressed in my nice number 1 dress. I went, knocked on the door, went to see the adjutant, and he notified the OC that I was there, Archie Moore. And of course, now I'm not so concerned about Archie Moore, because he was very impressed with the 3 months that I'd spent as 2IC of B Company. And James Hills had given him very good feedback as to what I'd done and so on. And he'd given me a good little testimonial when I said goodbye to him. So I wasn't concerned about Archie Moore anymore. I thought, you know, I'm okay with him now. And I went into, saluted, and said, so I'm finished with the academy now. I'm reporting for duty. So he sits behind his desk and he says to me, McGill, ek is so bly om jou te sien. And I thought, well, that's a good start, you know. He said, James Hills, that's now the OC of the company that I'd been to IC of with those 3 months that I was attached to the battalion. James Hills has got to go on staff course. And the voorcursus, the preparatory course for staff course, is starting next week. And James Hills is deployed up in Ondangwa with his company. I want you to go up and take over the company from him. Yeah. I wasn't expecting anything like that. So he said, and you'll stay up there with them until the company has to come back. So I said, yes, sir. I was expecting to go and bring my wife up once I'd found accommodation and so on. He said, so he says that stuff's not important. He said we'll sort that out for you. You just get up there and do it. So I said, well, when do you want me to go, sir? So he said, no, go to the quartermaster, draw a rifle, get all your kit, get everything ready, pack it up, and get on the train to Pretoria. You get on the aircraft. I've got a flight for you going up tomorrow morning from Waterkloof, and you go up to Ondangwa. Yes, sir. So that was my introduction. I, just put my books away, and I'd finished at the academy, and I had this illusion of gradually easing myself into regimental work again. No such time for that. I spent the rest of the day running around, getting all the kit that I needed, and getting issued with everything. And that evening, I climbed on the train overnight to Pretoria. The next morning, I managed to catch a lift from a military driver at the station in Pretoria. He took me straight to Waterkloof, dropped me there, and I went to movements, and they said, yes, your aircraft's taking off, I don't know, about an hour or two's time, and that was it. And I flew up to Ondangwa. Now, the Fire Force base at Ondangwa was right on the edge of the airfield. So, the helicopters were available, and the guys could be, there was a little ops room there, and if necessary, we could be briefed on operations. Generally, we were just told that, there's a contact in such and such an area, and off you go. You took off, quick chat to the Air Force commander and of the helicopters, and then you were on your way. So I got off the aircraft and I walked across to the base. I'd already done when I served with 2 Parabon up there. I'd spent time there, so I knew the base, and I knew the system and the procedure and the routine and so on. And I found James Hills in the ops room, and he said, "McGill, ek is bly om jou te sien." And we chatted a bit about the operation. So I thought, well, now there'll be formal handing and taking over, and he'll maybe come out with me on 1 or 2 of the contacts and show me the ropes, and before he goes off and so on. And I settled down. He showed me where I could sleep in the little officers' mess that was in one corner of the base. Some of the troops were out in the field. Others were on standby, waiting to be called out, because when the Fire Force was not very active, then we had to patrol. We were given patrolling tasks to do, and we had to go into the various areas and patrol. Sometimes lay ambushes, and we would often be involved in follow-ups when an insurgent group had been identified, to actually track them and try and hunt them down. So I went to bed that night, and 4 o'clock the next morning, somebody shakes my shoulder and wakes me up. It's James Hills. So he holds his hand out to me. He says, "Cheers, McGill." I look at him and he says, "Ek het 'n chopper gekry wat terugvlieg. Ek klim nou op die chopper. Sterkte hierso." Whoops, and he's gone. So I'm now the officer commanding B Company 1 Parachute Battalion. And I can tell you now that James Hills was a hard act to follow. He and I later became very, very close friends, and we still are today. He's one of my closest friends. He's a guy who I respect enormously, who taught me a great deal. And and who I really have a great affection for. So James was now gone, and now I had to now step into his shoes. Now that company had been, at that stage, James had been commanding the company since July 1977. So it was nearly a year and a half that he'd had them. He'd taken them all the way through all their training, got them all qualified, and had spent a lot of time with them. Now, I had admittedly spent 3 months with them on attachment from the academy before their training was complete. So I'd had a little bit of exposure to them and to their training. It's not as though they didn't know me, but they thought the world of James Hills. I mean, his companies were always the top companies in the battalion. He strived for that all the time. It was, he worked extremely hard. His troops were well disciplined. They were very competent. They were highly trained. And when they were given a job to do, they did it, and they did it well. But they all saw him as their boss. They all, he's the guy that they looked up to. And he was a major. I mean, in those days, well, still today, in the South African military context, companies are commanded by majors. It's the British system. I know the American system, and in many other countries, they have captains commanding companies. But in our system, the right person to command it is a major. Until a national service was introduced in 1978. And this company was a company that had come in thinking they were only going to do a year. And while they were busy doing their training, they were informed that now national service has been extended to 2 years. So you guys have got an extra year you've got to do. So they'd had a little bit to deal with as far as that was concerned. But their morale was high, their esprit de corps was high. They were really a fine bunch of soldiers. And I can tell you, I'm still in contact with them now. I've been to some of their reunions over the past few years. They have a WhatsApp group that they all keep in contact with one another, and they still are a fine bunch of men. But at that stage, they eyed me with a great deal of suspicion. They weren't going to just accept me as their new company commander. After national service had been introduced, there was a massive expansion in the South African Army, and one parachute battalion had to be completely reorganized shortly after that, because with 2 years of national service and troops coming in, and the previous ones not yet having cleared out, one parachute battalion increased. Eventually, they had a total of 8 rifle companies. So it was essentially 2 battalions in one, almost 3. So when that happened, there was a major shortage of officers at the level of captain major. And they were looking for people. So as a result, a lot of companies started being commanded not only by captains, but some of them by lieutenants. So it wasn't that unusual for a lieutenant to have to command a company, but where possible, they would rather have a major there. Now, these guys had had a major for all of their training, and now suddenly they had this young greenhorn lieutenant. And I'd only had one tour of operational duty, and I hadn't seen any action during that tour of duty. These guys had now been operational for about 7 or 8 months already. Yeah, six or 7 months, quite a while anyway. And during that time, they'd been very, very busy. They'd been deployed inside Angola, inside Zambia. They'd carried out many fire force actions in Ondanga, the Inovambo land. So they were an experienced company of paratroopers. I had some very good platoon commanders, second lieutenants. One in particular, a fellow called Mike Boone, who was a phenomenal man. He'd in fact completed his national service at 1 Parachute Battalion as an officer. Then he got to university, and then he did a couple of years at university, and then he volunteered to come and do another year with 1 Parachute Battalion. And so he'd been dealt into B Company, and he had a particularly good grasp of the fire force concept, and he was one of the few people that put things down in writing. And I was very grateful for this guy, because he was able to give me what he'd written, and I could study that. He was able to walk around with me and show me certain things and point out certain things, changes in the weaponry that the guys used and various other things. So he was a very useful guy to have. There was one other second lieutenant who was permanent force, and he was James's 2IC. So although James was a major, he only had a second lieutenant as a 2IC. There just weren't enough captains available to do that sort of thing. And Archie Moore had felt that this guy, his name was Herbie Puss, was not quite ready for taking over a company yet, and he didn't like the idea of giving a company to a second lieutenant. So, so I was given the job. Now, understandably, and Herbie had been in B Company for several years. In fact, I met Herbie before I went to the academy when he arrived at 1 Parachute Battalion with Mike Boone, as fresh from the infantry school. They hadn't even qualified as paratroopers yet, and they'd come now to do their parachute course. But shortly after I met them there, I went off to the academy. But Herbie had now been in B Company essentially since that time. So he'd been there for three years in B Company. And Herbie had actually seen a fair bit of action as well. And he'd been quite badly wounded and had recovered from the wound. In fact, that wound prevented him from ever becoming a parachute instructor, because he could never lift his one arm high enough to adopt a perfect parachute position. And that sort of prevented him from becoming a parachute instructor. But Herbie was an experienced operational officer. And he didn't like the idea that I'd been appointed over him. And he made it very clear that he didn't like it at all. So I had a little problem with Herbie. I must also, before I start telling the story, I must also make it clear that eventually Herbie and I formed an absolutely formidable team. And we really worked extremely well together when we eventually found each other. And in fact, when I left B Company, I handed over command of the company to him. By that time, he was already he was a captain himself. But at this stage, which was several years before that, Herbie was a young second lieutenant, experienced second lieutenant, highly competent second lieutenant, but with a chip on his shoulder, because I'd been appointed as the company commander, and he'd been sort of been hoping that he'd now be promoted to lieutenant and given the company. But Archie Moore had felt that Herbie was not quite up to it at that stage. So I had a battle from the start to win the confidence of the troops and to win the confidence of the officers. I had a very experienced company sergeant major, Ger Kitcha. He was a phenomenal guy and a very good company sergeant major, very experienced. He'd been a sergeant when I was an ordinary soldier, a rifleman at 1 Parachute. And he was the first permanent force guy at 1 Parachute Battalion that I ever met. You know, he always impressed me with fitness and so on. And now he was my company sergeant major. But he was also a little, you know, he helped me a lot, but he was a little, you know, this young guy from the academy, he should be commanding a platoon. He shouldn't be commanding a company yet, you know. So it was an uphill battle for me. My only real experience as a platoon commander had been the first operational deployment with 2 Parachute. It was good experience, and I'm very grateful that I had it. But I really wasn't. I didn't think I was ready yet to be taking over a company. But I now had to put on the right face. I had to maintain my pose, and try and get through this. I didn't fool Mike Boone. He could see that I was very unsure of myself. But he was wise for his years, and he gave me a lot of assistance and a lot of help and a lot of guidance, and he did it in a way that I didn't feel that he was trying to upstage me. Well, he was going to finish up at the end of that year, which was only a few weeks away, and then he was going to go back to university. So there was no sense of competition with him. He just wanted to make sure that everything went well with the company. And so he wanted to make sure that I made a success of it, for which I was very grateful. A lot of people are very hesitant to say that they learned from their subordinates. They feel that it's a reflection on them. Maybe it is. But I don't hesitate to say that I learned a great deal, not only from the officers like Mike Boone. I learned a great deal from my troops. They didn't set out to teach me anything, not in that sense, but they certainly did. They taught me a great deal. So there we were, and it was fortunately relatively quiet for the next few days or so. We did have 1 or 2 call-outs for Fire Force, but they weren't very successful call-outs. By the time we got there, the insurgents were gone, and the follow-ups weren't particularly good. Then there was a call-out for a follow-up because a section of troops from another unit had hit a contact. I think they'd been ambushed. And the insurgents were gone, and they wanted us to follow up. So I sent out a Hawk group. The Hawk group was now the 22-man group, 2 sections, and a commander and a sergeant. And it was Mike Boone's group that went out, and they were busy with the contact. This was about 2 weeks after I'd taken over command of the company. And they were busy with the follow-up. And they had this section in front with the scouts moving ahead and tracking. And the tracks were clear, and they were following them. They were pretty sure they were going to they would catch up with these guys and be able to initiate a contact with them. The insurgents realized that these paratroopers are gaining on them, because our guys were extremely fit, and they would run on the trail, and we had some very good trackers. And this one guy who was probably the best tracker we had in our company, a fellow called Pochi Potgieter. And Pochi was running on the track. And what happened then? And the rest of the guys were spread in formation behind him and moving through the bush, expecting to reach contact fairly soon. And the insurgents, realizing how close the paratroopers were, stopped, and they planted a POMZ personnel mine, which is activated by a tripwire. That tripwire is very difficult to see, very, very difficult to see. Very thin wire that they'd spread across the track. And as Pochi was running on the track, he set off the tripwire, and that mine, it looks like a pineapple, which is driven into the ground by a stake, so it's above the ground. when it explodes. And it was just on one side of him. And it exploded. But it ripped his legs to shreds, both his legs. And he was very, very badly wounded. Several of the other guys got hit as well. Shrapnel in the one guy got shrapnel just above his eyes, and several others got wounded in the head. Some of them got it in the legs and various other spots. But the shrapnel, I forget how many. I think about 5 or 6 of the guys were actually hit, but none of them were that serious. But Pochi was bad. He was really bad, and he was losing a lot of blood. And Mike called in the choppers, and we were notified that they were coming in, and they picked Pochi up in a Puma and they brought him through. And the troops knew about it because news of something like this spread like wildfire through the company. So the company were all waiting on the edge of the tarmac when the helicopter landed. And when it landed and they moved, took the stretcher, handed the stretcher out through the door, the troops from the company grabbed the stretcher and they ran because there was a field hospital right on the edge of the runway. And they ran to get him to the field hospital. And I was running next to the stretcher. And I still get emotional when I think about it. But Pochi was lying on the stretcher, obviously in extreme pain. And he looked up at me and held up his hand. And I grabbed his hand. And as he was carried through to the hospital, he squeezed my hand and he said to me, "Luitenant, moenie vir my ma sê nie, dit gaan vir haar doodmaak. Lieutenant, please don't tell my mother. It'll kill her." I just squeezed his hand. And we carried him into the tent where the hospital is, and they took over. And the guys withdrew. But I didn't want to go, so I stayed in there. And they started working on him. And the next thing is one of the doctors turned around and saw me. And he chewed me out. And he said, "You get out of here. You've got no business in here. We don't want to see you here." Anyway, I went out. And, you know, when I saw the state that Pochi was in and the state of his legs, you know, arteries had been severed. I didn't think Pochi was going to make it. And I went out. By then it was dark. And I went out into the dark next to the hospital tent. And I wept. I thought we were going to lose him. And I just prayed that he would be all right. They flew him down to Grootfontein and then back to 1 Mil. And Pochi spent most of the next year in hospital. I think he must have had about 9 different operations. They wanted to amputate at one stage both his legs, and he wouldn't let them. And they told him that the legs are going to give you trouble all your life. He said, "You don't touch my legs, you don't take them off." The one leg recovered fairly well, but over the next few years, several times they said to him, "We've got to take your leg off." Pochi has still got both his legs today, and he walks. He walks with great difficulty. When you look at the state of his legs, when you see how they were mangled by that mine, you see the twisted flesh and the scars. It's a miracle that he can walk. That guy is one of the bravest guys I've ever met. We're still in contact. I see him quite often. I'm hoping to see him when I go up to run the Bisley in a few weeks' time. in Bloemfontein. And I hope to see Pochi then. He lives in Bethlehem. He became a successful businessman. He established a business. He did very well with it. But Pochi is an amazing man. And I learned a great deal from Pochi, a great deal. And I'm proud to still be his friend today. When he phones me, and he phones me quite often, he says to me, Generaal, ek en jy het 'n spesiale bond. We've got a special bond. That's just because I was holding his hand at that particular time when we carried him into the tent. He says, you were there when I needed you. I didn't do anything to be there. I just happened to be there. But, you know, it meant a great deal to that man. Of course, that was my first combat casualty. The first time one of the people under my command got hit and wounded. Fortunately, he didn't die. And it was a sort of in a sense, a wake-up call, you know, the reality of the war. Till then, it had been distant. Even if you saw some of the enemy that were dead, it was something that was distant because you didn't know them. But now it was somebody that you knew personally, somebody that you had run long distances with, somebody that you had jumped out of an aeroplane with, somebody that you really felt you identified with them, and it was somebody under your command, and you felt the weight of responsibility, and you felt the reality of war for the first time. So that was my introduction to returning to 1 Parachute Battalion. We stayed on conducting fire force operations there. We were there through an election, sort of a South African sponsored election, which SWAPO didn't take part in. So it wasn't really a valid election in any way. But we were there and we had people deployed in certain areas. We set up 3 different fire forces around Ovambo land. And it was a busy time. But I thought, well, you know, I'll be home before Christmas. I was actually hoping to be home before the 16th of December because that's my wife's birthday. That didn't happen. There were no cell phones in those days. I had no means of getting hold of my wife. I'd been able to phone her just before I left to tell her I'm being sent up to the border. I'm not going to be around for a while. They say they're going to try and sort you out as far as housing is concerned. Don't be too optimistic about it. I'll try and sort it out when I get back. I don't know when I'm going to get back. It was the first time I was telling her that, and I told her to use those words many times in the next few years. But they contacted her from 1 Parachute Battalion. I didn't know about all of this. I was busy with Pochi and with the fire force and with the other things that we were doing. They contacted Anne and they said to her, we've got a flat that you can move into. We'll arrange for the removal company to go and collect you and bring your stuff up here. So if you would just do that. So she did. She had to pack up again on her own. She was getting used to it now. And she drove the car up and with the 2 little girls. And when she got to 1 Parachute Battalion, the flat that they had wasn't big enough to accommodate all our stuff. So they got the removal people to pack stuff into my office. I'd never even set foot in my office. I didn't even know what was inside it. But they packed all the furniture that wouldn't fit into our flat. They packed into my office in the battalion. And so they sorted Anne out, the battalion HQ. And then one day I got a phone call from the quartermaster in our ops room down in Bloemfontein, and he said he just wanted to sort out one or two things about stuff that is needed up there, and stuff that must be brought back when we return, and so on. And I chatted with him, and then he said, and this was Fani van Skalkwyk, who had become quite a good friend of mine. And he said to me, oh, by the way, somebody wants to speak to you. And he had Anne in the office with him. And so she put her on the line. So I was able to talk to her. That was the only contact that I had with her during this period that I was up there. And, you know, she assured me everything was going all right and they're getting sorted out and so on. It was just difficult with a lot of the stuff that's not in the flat. But at least she had a place to stay and at least she was there. So I was at peace, you know. I said to her, you know, I'm not going to make your birthday, but I hope to be with the kids when it's for Christmas. And then on the 30th of December, 2 days before the end of the year, both our daughters were born on the same day, on the 30th of December. So I thought, well, you know, if I can at least get back before that, then I can be there for their birthday. But every time I tried to find out when we were going back, I'd get told, no, you guys are needed up here longer. We can't send you back yet. We can't send you back yet. And then there was another thing which was an issue to me. In December, the academy, the university had its graduation ceremony down in Stellenbosch. And guys who were at the military academy, the Defence Force had a special arrangement that they would let you get authority to travel down at state expense to Stellenbosch to get accommodation for, I don't know, almost a week that you'd be down there, 5 days or a week or something, so that you could attend the graduation and be capped at the graduation ceremony. You'd be there in time to go to the outfitters so that you could hire the academic garb, you know, the tuaga, the toga, and the hood, the cap that you've got to wear in the right colors for your degree and so on. So you could get all of that sort of stuff and arrange for everything to be sorted out. And you can arrange for anybody in your family who wants to come. I think they allowed 2 people to attend their graduation. You could arrange for people to go there. So I'd been looking forward to going back to Stellenbosch to graduate. It wasn't going to happen. So I managed to contact the university and said, no, you know, I'm not going to make it. What's going to happen? So they said, well, either you graduate in absentia, or else we'll postpone your graduation for the March graduation, because in March those guys who had to write supplementary exams and so on, for whatever reason, they would then graduate in the March. So I said, no, I don't want this done in absentia. It means too much to me. I want to graduate, do it in March. So they said, okay, they postponed it. So I didn't graduate with my guys. All the other guys who were on course were down there and they graduated and went together and so on. It was I was very sorry that I missed that, but that's one of those things. I eventually got back to Bloemfontein on the 30th of December, on the birthday of my 2 daughters. So I was able to see them for their birthday. The troops were given a few days leave. They went off. I was able to go with Anne and the girls, go to Marselspoort and have a picnic there, and you know, a little birthday celebration for them, which I was very grateful for. And a few days after New Year, the troops were back, and and we were on the go again. And we were warned that we were going up to Ondangwa again shortly. One of the citizen force units had taken over from us, from Parabin, a company from Parabin. But now we would have to go up and take over again, because they only had, I think they had about 6 weeks that they were there. But at that stage, the 2IC of 1 Parabin was Chris Leroux, who had been so keen on me going to the academy. And as 2IC, he felt that he needs now to make sure that I do the courses that I have to, so that I can start catching up. And Archie Moore said to him, he can't go on course now. He's got a company to run. He's got work to do here. Chris Leroux, he knew how to handle Archie Moore very well. And he managed to get it sorted out. And the next thing is I was sent down to Oudtshoorn to become, or to attend an anti-tank platoon commander's course. I did the course, and it was a great course, and I qualified as an anti-tank instructor. And, you know, we used all the anti-tank weapons, the 106 recoilless gun, and the rocket launchers, and the missiles, the Ontak, which was on its way out at that stage, and then the Milan, which had more recently come in. But at the end of the course, I was called in about a couple of days before the end of the course, called in with another lieutenant who was on course. We were both called into the OC's office, and he said, "You've both been promoted to captain." Yeah. This guy, substantive, but the OC at the infantry school at that stage was Witkop Badenhorst. And so Witkop said, "Maar jy is net tydelik bevorder. Want jy is nog nie kursus gekwalifiseerd nie. You're not course qualified, so you're only temporarily promoted until you course qualified." So, you know, well, at least I can wear the rank, but yeah, what about the pay? And then he said, "Maar jy is tydelik bevorder met soldaai, with pay." So that was a great relief. So I was being paid on a captain's scale. So that was great. And then he said, "Maar jy gaan nie nou terug. You're not going back to 1 Parabin. You're going to stay for a while longer. We've got instructions from Army headquarters that you've got to do all the courses that you have to, that you're behind now." Yeah, so I thought, well, I don't quite know how that's going to work out. But of course, when Army headquarters informed 1 Parachute Battalion of this, Archie Moore climbed into them. Archie Moore, he had contacts in Army headquarters. He was able to organize things that other officers never could. And now Witkop Badenhorst said to me, "You can write off the rest of this year. You're going to be doing courses for the whole of this year." Yeah, I was very upset about that. In any case, then I was called in by the 2IC at the infantry school, Holly Holzhausen, who was a former paratrooper. And he said to me, "We've had a change from Army headquarters. They say we must assess you to see whether you're up to scratch, and then we can grant you a pass in the courses. You don't have to do the whole course. So the assessment for each of the courses will entail a written exam and a practical exam." So I said, "Okay." So he said, the first one you've got to do is section leaders." I said to him, "Section leaders?" He said, "Yes, you've got to write an exam on section leaders, and you've got to go now and do a practical. And here's the book." So I went and studied the book. And then another captain from the infantry school, Johan Jooster, he took me out into the field, out through Northgate, and we went out into the field. And and we did a TUT, a tactical exercise with our troops. And he said, this is happening, that's happening, you got this enemy appeared on that side, they fire at you from there, and what are you going to do? So then I'd explain to him what I want to do, and he'd tick the thing off. And then I had to do the same thing for platoon commanders. And then they said, you've got to do platoon weapons. So I had to do a written exam on all the platoon weapons and then do a practical, disassemble them, assemble them, clean them, fire them, and so on. So I went through all of that, and I'd managed to make sure that I had used my opportunities when they arose to familiarize myself with all of these things. So I passed without any difficulty, and so they said, "Okay, you can go back now. The only courses you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do a mortar course, a battalion mortar course, and you're going to have to do a counterinsurgency course, an urban, rural and urban counterinsurgency." So I went back to Bloemfontein, back to my company, and I was barely back at the company. Then we were. In fact, what happened was we were going to go to a ball on the Friday night. The Southern Cross Association or Foundation or whatever they were had arranged a big ball in the city hall, and we had to all buy tickets for that, and it was going to be a formal ball, and you got to dress up in your mess dress, and you've got to go to this ball. So Anne was quite keen on it. So she'd got herself a nice dress and so on. And the Friday morning, Thursday, the company commanders were warned, said, pack your standby kit. Make sure your troops are all ready to move at short notice. Well, my standby kit was always packed, so it wasn't a big issue. But Anne drove me to the battalion the next day because I had my standby kit with me. Normally I used to cycle in, but I had this big kit that I had to carry. So she packed it in the car. She drove me in and dropped me off. And I said to her, I hope everything's going to be okay. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen today. And straight after the parade, the battalion parade that morning, all the company commanders were called in, and we were told, pack up everything, draw first line ammunition, and out to the Brug. And we weren't told anything more. We went out to the Brug, and there we were given orders for an exercise. With the security that was taking place there, we knew that this was no exercise. But anyway, orders for an exercise. And tomorrow morning, you've got to jump and simulate an attack on the base that we built out in the training area, which is where we were staying, a place called Reinholdskop. So I knew there's not going to be any ball tonight, and I had no way of getting hold of Anne. And Anne went and had her hair done, and that afternoon she dressed in her evening dress that she'd got for herself, and waited for me to come home so I could take her to the ball. And I never came home, so she waited until, I don't know, I suppose about 9 o'clock, and then she'd arranged with one of the neighbors to look after our two kids. But at about 9 o'clock, she said, "Well, I'm going to bed. He's obviously not coming." And then the next day we had this exercise that we did, and my company was appointed to do the assault, and on this base, and the other companies were used to drop stoppers. And at that stage, one Parabon was part of the newly established 44 Para Brigade, and Jan Breitenbach was the 2IC of the brigade. And he was in a helicopter up above, guiding us where to go and what to do. The battalion commander, Archie Moore, and the whole battalion headquarters had jumped with us, and we were moving in for this big attack. And then we were told, it's not an attack, it's not an exercise. Tomorrow morning we're flying up to the operational area. We're doing an attack. And it was a SWAPO base called Base 52, which was inside Zambia. They were still operating a lot from Zambia at that stage. And so we went up to, my 2IC, Herbie, had to go into Bloemfontein to Tempe to fetch something while we were out there. So I asked him to try and get into our flat and came to the door. And he said, look, your husband won't be back for a few days. We're going to be gone for a few days. And that's all he told her. So she knew, and he said, but don't worry, don't worry. So she went off, and being the wife that she is, she didn't worry. She just accepted it. And we flew up to Grootfontein, and we had almost a repetition of what they did for the Kasinga operation. We slept in the big hangar there. General Jannie Geldenhuys came and gave us a pep talk, and this big operation for this jump onto this base in Zambia was going to take place. I find it interesting that in some military, alleged military scholars who write about the border war, they see Kasinga in the same light as Crete, the graveyard of the South African paratroops. They jumped at Kasinga and they realized there that this is not going to work, so they never jumped again. That's bull dust. There were more parachute operations that took place after Kasinga than there ever were before Kasinga. And one parachute battalion particularly participated in many parachute operations. So they were none of them as big as Kasinga, and most of them were entailed jumping either at first light, just before it got light, and or at night. But anyway, the fact is that this was one of them, and this is going to be a battalion jump to wipe out this camp. And we were woken up at 3 o'clock the next morning, and we had to fit parachutes, and we got into the aircraft, and the aircraft all took off, and we were flying over Zambia, and we were going to be jumping at first line, and the Canberras and the Buccaneers went in, and they bombed the base, and we got the command action stations, and we were about to stand in the door. We were less than 2 minutes out when suddenly we were given stop drop. The doors were closed, and we were told to unhook and sit down. And we flew back to Grootfontein. And apparently there'd been a security breach somewhere. I don't know whether it was part of the network set up by old, what was that naval guy who was caught out as a spy eventually, Gerard, I think his name was. Anyway, I don't know whether he was part of that or not, but in any case, there'd been a breach, and the camp had been vacated. It was empty. There was nobody in the camp, and it was vacated 2 days before the drop took place. So, there's no doubt that there was a major security breach with that particular one. Anyway, then they took us to Mapacha, and we spent time in Mapacha. They were now trying to find something for us to do. They had the paratroopers there. They were all ready. Surely we can find some other target to get them. You can't do that, work like that. So, they shunted us around. While we were there, then we were there, then we were somewhere else. There was nowhere for us to stay. At one stage, we were in Katima Mulilo, and the the troops were getting bored and they were causing a bit of, and one of my troops was locked up by the RSM there, and then we were told we got to go back, and I had to get my troop out of the cusp because he's locked up now and we want to go back, and I fortunately found Commandant Mo Ulshich, who was working with UNITA at that stage and based at this wasn't Katima, this was at Rundu, and he managed to get my guy out of the cell, and we just put him. I think his name was Durrant, the guy who was anyway. We got on board the plane and we were taken back to Bloemfontein. So this was an example of what was happening at that stage. This sort of thing was happening quite often. We would be chased up to one of these places, Ondangwa or Katima or Rundu, for some operation, and then things would go wrong, and then we'd have to come back, and sometimes we would go in, but anyway, that operation that never was cost me and my wife our outing to the Southern Cross Ball. But it was good experience. Then we were sent up again to deploy, and we were on our way to Ondangwa, and we got to Grootfontein. And when we got off the aircraft at Grootfontein, I got an urgent message that I must go to because Grootfontein was where the logistic headquarters was. We were all supported. The whole war effort was supported logistically from Grootfontein. And they had their own log ops set up over there. And I was told to report there. And when I got there, because it was just my company that was going up to Ondangwa. And when I got to there I found the SSO Ops, Colonel Eddie Webb, also a paratrooper. And he said to me, you people have got to do another operation for us. I'm not letting you go at this stage. But we want a group of insurgents has infiltrated south of the Red Line. They're now in the area where the farms are. And we have a clear indication that they are inside the mountains, the Gaub Mountains. Now, these mountains are within a triangle, which was often referred to as the Triangle of Death, with Tsumeb in the north, Grootfontein in the east, and Otavi in the west. And if you draw that triangle, then it's very mountainous area, and those mountains are razor sharp rocks, bush, dense bush, valleys, very little water, quite a daunting area. But there were farms in that area as well, some of them right up in the mountains, and they were very concerned about this. So Eddie Webb says to me, I want you to work out a plan of how you're going to get your company into those mountains without anybody knowing that you're there. And I want the company to establish ambushes wherever there is water and wherever there's a likelihood that the insurgents might pass through a particular area because of the terrain. So I want the company spread out through those mountains. But I don't want you to go in by day, and I don't want anybody to see you. So you tell me, you sit down and work out a plan. Tell me how you're going to get your company in there. And he gave me the maps and necessary stuff and so on. So I sat down there, and my company were at the airfield. Now, they don't know anything about this. They wanting to go to Ondangwa now. They're waiting. Herbie, my 2IC, has got them ready there to go. So I sat down and I worked out a little plan, and I went back to Eddie Webb and I presented it to him and he approved it. And for the plan, I said, if we can get local farmers who are members of the commandos, to let us use their cattle trucks. And if we can put tarpaulins around the inside of the cattle truck so that people can't see inside those trucks, then we can load the troops into those trucks. And the trucks can take the dirt roads, go winding through the mountains. And at certain spots, which I have identified on the map, if the sections are dropped off at those spots, then they can move from those spots to where I'd like them to have the ambushes laid. So he said, we'll see what we can do. So I went and informed my troops that we got something else that's going to happen. We must just wait for the go-ahead. And it wasn't long, and Eddie Webbs sent a message to me. I must come up and see him, and he said, it's all been arranged. The farmers are bringing their trucks into Grootfontein. I think there were 3 of these big cattle trucks. You've got to brief them where you want them to go and what they must do and so on, and where they must drop you off. They're all farmers from this area. They know the area, and they're all members of the commando, so it's okay. So that's what happened. And they took us through, and we went down to a little place called Combat, which is between Grootfontein and Otavi. And there the road turns up into the mountains. And that's where the trucks came, and they turned up there. And just before it got dark, they went through Combat, and they turned up and drove into the mountains. And nothing looked suspicious. There was nothing military about it, anything at all. The troops were all bouncing around in the back of these cattle trucks. And in the dark, as they were driving, they would slow down at these spots and give an indication to the troops, and then the next section would go out, and they all knew where they'd be going. They all had their maps, and they knew where they'd have to go to lay the ambushes and so on. And my company headquarters, I had myself and Herbie, my 2IC, and our intelligence officer, and our radio intelligence NCO, a corporal, and our signaler, also a corporal. So just the 4 of us. We also had our spot where we jumped off, and then we had to climb straight up the mountains, and it was one of the highest mountains in the range, because I wanted us to be in a position where we would get the best possible radio reception. And we climbed in the dark. We climbed up that mountain to the top. Yeah, our boots were sliced by those rocks. Our trousers were in shreds. It was hackensteek bushes and sharp rocks, and we were tumbling over the stuff, and we had our rations that we were carrying with us, and extra water and so on. But we got up to the top, and we established a little headquarters there. Very well hidden. Nobody would have had any idea that we were up there. And we had very good comms from up there. We managed to make comms with all the sections that were deployed, and I had comms back to Grootfontein. The comms to Grootfontein I could only get through a relay station. And the relay station was run by the wife of one of the commando members on one of the farms, Tannie Pompey. Wonderful, wonderful lady. We only heard her voice. We didn't know her. We didn't know who she was. She had a marvelous voice. Of course, all of the troops conjured up this vision of this sexy young girl who was sitting there. Tannie Pompey was a much older woman who was married with kids and a farmer's wife, and lived on the farm. A wonderful, wonderful woman, but not a pin-up, not the sort of person that you would get in a swim costume. But this is what the troops, because they heard this wonderful, sexy voice of hers on the radio, and so they all had their ideas about Tannie Pompey. And she, in fact, with some of the sections, I couldn't get hold of the sections, and she was incredible on the radio. This woman, she sat there on her farm with this radio with all the stuff that the military had given her, and she understood radio. She knew how they worked, and she was able to pick up the guys, the sections that couldn't make contact with me, and relay their messages back to me. So it was a wonderful setup that we had there, but we weren't getting any insurgents. There was nothing happening. And at one point I had to do a resupply of the guys because we were up there for quite a while. I can't remember, 2 weeks or something, but I had to resupply them. And so I had to arrange that with Grootfontein, and they had to send a farmer's truck again, and all these strategic points that just slow down along far enough to dump the supplies off without even stopping the truck, you know. And then the troops would have to go and collect their supplies from down there, all done in the dark. And the troops were wonderful. They did it so well. And while we were there, my birthday comes around. Now, my birthday was the 31st of March. And I wanted to, you know, we were rationing ourselves with water. But there was a windmill about, I don't know, 6 or 8 kilometers away from where we were. And there was water available there. And we would, when our water would run out, then I'd send 2 of the guys to go to this windmill and to refill all the water bottles. And they'd have to do this water patrol at sort of last light, and then fill the water bottles in the dark, and then make their way back in the dark. And so I sent them from water patrol maybe 2 or 3 times. And we actually shifted the position of our headquarters, just so we didn't stay in one place all the time, but all around on this peak, in different parts of this peak where we still had reasonable comms. And then on the 31st, I said to Herbie, I want a treat today. I'm going on the water patrol. You stay over here. Myself and Tandy, the intelligence NCO, we're going to go on the water patrol. So I went down. And when I got to that water, I took a 2-liter water bottle and I filled it. And I drank. And I drank and I drank. Yeah, I had such a stomachache from all that water that I drank. But I was determined to, on my birthday, have a really good drink of water. Anyway, we then filled all the water bottles, took them back up and back up to our. I was staggering along with this pain in my stomach from all the jelly water that I drank. The next day, I get a message from one of my corporals, one of the section leaders. He says to me, I'm sorry, you know, we had we during the night, the baboons came and stole our boots. I said to him, Justice, what do you mean the baboon stole your boots? Baboons don't move around at night, he said. He said to me, well, so they came, and we were all sleeping, and one of the guys saw them. They ran off with our boots. We're going to have to get new boots. I said to him, why, what did you take your boots off for? You're operational. You're not supposed to take your boots off. You sleep with your boots on. I'm sorry, sir, but, you know, we made a mistake, but it won't happen again. But yeah, but you know, we in this sort of terrain, we got to have boots. Can they do an emergency boot supply for us? Now I'm thinking to myself, how do I explain this to the ops room in Grootfontein? How do I explain that my troops took their boots off at night and the flipping baboons stole their boots? Yeah, I was angry. I gave him such a blistering over the radio. And so when I'd finished, there's silence for a moment. And then he says, April Fool. Yeah, of course, it was the 1st of April, you see. So that guy Justice, the troops, the rest of the company just loved him because he was a great joker, and you know, he was always coming up with things like this. He was a very naughty troop, but he was a good troop. He was a good section leader. But anyway, he had the gumption to pull this trick on me. Well, what else could I do but laugh? So anyway, he really caught me. He caught me completely with that one. Then I got another message to say, you people are being withdrawn. You've got to go and get your orders from, you're being placed under, I think it was Commandant van Rensburg, Commandant or Colonel. He's going to be down at Otavi. I think he was a Colonel that large van Rensburg. Anyway, you will give your orders. You've got to go through to Otavi and receive your orders. He's arranging for one of the farmers to pick you up, and they gave me a grid reference in code, and you must see that you meet him there. So I took the other guys with me, and we went down to the spot. It was a road winding through the mountain, just a little twee-spoor paadjie, a little jeep track going through the mountains. And we went down, and I got to the spot where he was now supposed to meet me, and I waited in the bush, and we were on a little koppie, and there was tall grass growing around the koppies, green, yellow grass. But the koppies were with a lot of rocks and a lot of bush, and I was in this koppie, and on the other side was another koppie, and the road running between them, the little jeep track going between them. I was sitting there in the cover under the cover of the bush, and on the other side I saw a kudu bull come out of the bush, and that kudu bull walked across the open grassy plain between the two koppies, crossed the little jeep track, and walked off in the distance there. Now, I have never seen such a magnificent bull in my life, a kudu bull. He's the twists in his horns seem to just go on and on and on. He had the most magnificent horns. And that sight of that kudu bull is something which became imprinted in my mind. It was one of the most beautiful sights that I'd ever seen. It was absolutely magnificent. The color of the yellow grass, the bush in the background on the koppie, the rocks, and this stately beast moving across the open. It was something quite phenomenal, something absolutely unbelievable. Anyway, I was taken to Otavi. I was given my briefing, given my orders, and told that we had to all withdraw down to the road. There'd be no clandestine movement now. They just want us in Otavi as quickly as possible. The insurgents have all been identified. They're first south. They're heading towards Otjiwarongo. And if we don't watch out, they're going to go all the way to Windhoek. We got to stop them. So off we went. I got my troops out. I went back up to the mountains. The farmer first took me to his house, introduced me to his wife and his children, and gave me a slap-up meal. I got to know the farmer very well. His name was Henna Volkman. He was a major in the commandos, later became I think the area protection forces or something, and the one that was based in Otavi. He was the commanding officer there. A wonderful man, wonderful German family. It was actually a memorable evening that I spent there with them. And then he drove me back in the dark to the same spot where he'd picked me up. And the guys, we notified them. They came down and met me there and took me back up to the headquarters that I had on the hill. And we notified everybody, and they were all picked up the next day. And we drove through to Otavi. And from Otavi, we operated from there southwards. We were given a few bushmen to assist us as trackers. And the police arrived. And the police were also involved. And but there was tremendous friction between the police and the paratroopers. There was another company of paratroopers as well. And that company commander was not exactly a diplomatic guy. and he and the police guy was I think he was a major. I'm not sure. I think he was a major, the police commander. His name was Gert Nordier. He was a very, very aggressive commander and very anxious to make contact with the insurgents. But the delineation of responsibilities was not very clear. Who must do the follow-up? Because the police were doing a follow-up, and we were doing follow-ups. And every time tracks would be, and you know, there was no proper coordination. And eventually I was instructed to hand over command of my company to my 2IC, to Herbie, and they placed me in the headquarters with the police so that I could act as a sort of a coordinator between the police and the other guys. And there was a police brigadier who put in an appearance every so often. I can't remember his name now, but I'll have it written down somewhere in my records. But he came through, and he was a very nice guy. And he spoke to me before I took up this position. He spoke to me. He said, "Look, we know Gert is a difficult man. We know he's a difficult man to work with, but he's the right man to do this job here. So I don't know you, but you've got to just make the thing work between the police and the military," which is what I then did, as to the best of my ability. And we had a fire force, and eventually what we started, the situation we eventually got was the police, and the police had very good trackers with them. Some also had Bushman trackers. And the police were given the job of the follow-up and to chase the tours. And we manned the fire force in the background. And the other guy, the other company commander, paratrooper company commander, he was sort of relegated, moved out of the thing a bit, because he just couldn't get on with Gert. And I eventually established a reasonably good relationship with Gert Nordier. We worked quite well together. And the fire force, Herbie ran the fire force with the Pumas, and they were sitting. It worked very well in the sense that we moved the fire force to wherever the insurgents were, so we were close to them. So we had a very short reaction time. But then I got a message to say, "You've got to go back to Bloemfontein. You're being sent on course. You've got to do another course at the infantry school." Yeah, and I protested, and I said, "But we're in the middle of an operation here, you know, and we're going to hit contact soon. No, you've got to go. Hand over to Herbie." So I then had to, they arranged they took me straight out of the field and put me in a vehicle with a driver, and the driver drove me to Windhoek. I had my rifle, all my ammunition, I had grenades, I had all my stuff with me, because where was I going to hand that stuff in? And I got to Windhoek, and they said it was after hours, and they said, you know, "Yes, yeah, at the order, at the duty room, there's your ticket. You got to fly from here to Joburg, and from there to they couldn't get a flight from me to Bloemfontein, from there to Kimberley, and then somebody must pick you up from one Parabon in Kimberley." In the end, my wife was the one who picked me up. But anyway, I said to them, so what about this? No, the orderly sergeant, he doesn't know. So I said, "But the flight's only tomorrow. Where do you want me to sleep tonight?" So I said, "No." So one of my friends from the academy, who was in my class, he was based in Windhoek, and I had his number, or I got it from the orderly room. I don't know, but I phoned him, and he was married to a girl whose father was a military policeman, and he said, "Come stay with us tonight." So he came and picked me up, and I went through to his place. And I said, "What do I do with all of this stuff?" So he called his father, and his father was in charge of the military policeman in Windhoek. And he came through and he said, "You can't take that stuff with you." I said, "I know I can't take it with me. What does I do with it?" So he said, yeah, give it to me. So yeah, I handed it all to him. What they did with it after that, I don't know. But anyway, the next day I was put on the plane and flown back, and I went down to Oudtshoorn to attend another course there. So this was the way that it was going with me and B Company at that stage. It was very, very difficult. And at the end, in the middle of the year, B Company then cleared out. I'd been their commander for 8 months, the last 8 months of their training. Before that, it had been James Hills. By the time they cleared out, we were working quite well together. The troops had come to accept me. They had seen that I would do things with them. I followed the same procedures as far as I could, or that James Hills had, and it went well in the end. And by then, Herbie and I had found each other, and he was no longer fighting with me in making my life difficult. He and I were working very well together. Now, I think the days that we spent in that little headquarters that I had on top of the mountain in Gaub, that helped to cement our relationship. The troops cleared out, and now I had to take command of a new B Company. I'd have to go and select them at the various units, but now there was a little gap between the time that those troops cleared out and the other troop. And D Company, which was still there under David Blau, and one of the other companies, I forget which one, they were suddenly tasked for an operation, and they had to go up to Katima Mulilo, and we went up. I was told that I had to be a dispatcher on this thing, so I went along with a whole lot of other guys. We went up and we dispatched them for Operation Stormpot. They jumped into a forest in Zambia, in southwestern Zambia, about 200 kilometers away from the border. And the intelligence had said there are a lot of SWAPO in the base, in the forest, and there are some camps there. All the camps that they got to were deserted. They didn't find anybody in the camps. The intelligence wasn't good enough. But they did have quite a few contacts, and in fact, one of them, the Lance Corporal Bell, was killed in a contact during that particular operation. So they had some contacts in the forest while they were in there, and eventually they were withdrawn and brought back. But that was interesting because it was dispatching for an operation, and we dispatched them at night. It was quite an impressive operation. And then my time with the new company started. What I do have to say at this stage is that while I was running B Company, James Hills's B Company, in the last 8 months that they were there, every time that we were inside the base, Archie Moore, the battalion commander, made my life a living hell. Nothing that I did was right. Nothing that my troops did was right. He found fault with absolutely everything. I just, no matter how I tried, I couldn't do anything right. And every time he'd pull me in, and I'd be on orders in front of him, and he'd give me a blistering and chase me out of his office and throw things at me, and so I'd go and I think to myself, I've made a huge mistake. Obviously, this is not where I'm meant to be. And I'd speak to Anne. I'd say to her, look, sweetheart, I made a mistake. Obviously, this guy doesn't want me here. He's making my life impossible. I can't be a company commander under these conditions. I can't work with a man like this. I think I must apply for a transfer to the Marines. And said to me, you can't do that. She said, you're going to be unhappy anywhere except with the paratroopers. You need to stay. Things are going to change sometime. They must change. I said, well, I don't know. I didn't want to be inside the unit, because as soon as we arrived back, we were in trouble. And everything I did, everything my troops did, I was in trouble for. And he'd order the troops to be punished, but he'd give me a blistering. And I thought, well, this guy doesn't want me in the unit. He doesn't want me here. When we went out and selected the troops for the new company from units all over the country, and we brought them in. And then we continued with their training, and then we had to take them through the selection, the parachute PT course, and then through the hangar. I couldn't go through the hangar with them, of course, because I wasn't a parachute instructor at that stage. But through all of that, and I was being taken away for courses down the infantry school in between. Through all of that, suddenly, Archie Moore just changed like that. And it was as if I couldn't do anything wrong. It was as if I was suddenly his blue-eyed boy. And I must say, I worked really hard with Herbie, and I had a new company sergeant major. He was only a sergeant, Sergeant Darwin Morkel, and he was still relatively inexperienced at that stage. So he was learning the job, and you know, I'd been through a hard school with the previous B company, so but I still didn't know have all the answers. I still had lots of learning to do. But at least Herbie and I were working very closely together. And I subsequently found out, when I got to know Archie Moore much better, because I did ask him many years later, I asked him, why did you hammer me like that during those first 8 months? And he smiled at me. He said, McGill, I was testing you. I wanted to see whether you would break. I wanted to see whether you were worth having in one parable. So I looked at him and I said, and? He said, well, I didn't chase you away, so you must have made it, eh? So that was encouraging, but of course he didn't tell me that at the time. You know, at the time I just suddenly found that now things were going better, but we were working really hard with our company, and there were 2 companies being trained at the same time from that intake. And my company was doing so well. They were being evaluated. And it was being evaluated. So I was so proud of those troops. We were giving them good training, but they were responding so well. They were really, you know, and this was the first group of troops that I'd taken right from scratch through their training. And so it was a special to me in a sense. Then we reached the stage where we just had to do we'd done all our training except our final counterinsurgency training. And at that stage, one parachute battalion was using the Madimbu corridors, they called it. It was a strip of land about 50 kilometers wide between the Limpopo River and the homeland of Venda. And that strip along the border was thick bush, an ideal area for counterinsurgency training. And there was an airfield within that area called Madimbu. There were some old mines in the area, Gumbu mine and so on, but they were not operational anymore. They were all deserted. And there was a mine recruiting station at a little place called Mobiligwe. And at Mobiligwe, the mine organization that used to recruit workers from Rhodesia and Mozambique and Malawi and so on, it used to bring the people to that spot over there, and then from there they'd be taken down to the mines. So there were some little facilities over there, and we utilized those facilities. The area had now become a military training area. And we utilized those facilities at Mobiligwe as a base, and we did our training from there. So we were busy with training over there. And we get a message that the commandant, the battalion commander, and his headquarters are coming to see us. And we thought they're just coming to check and see how the training's going and so on. And when they arrived there, we found, no, there's something else on the go. At that stage, Operation Bowler was in full swing. This was early in 1980, early in 1980. So the war in Rhodesia was coming to an end, and from about September 1979, the war in Rhodesia had got so hot that the Rhodesians didn't have enough fire forces to man the whole setup. So they asked us to help. And at the political level, it was agreed, and Magnus Malone got hold of the Parachute Battalion and said, you guys got to send people up there. So we initially sent a company up, and they were trained by the Rhodesians in the fire force technique, the way that they applied it. And they did a very good job there. So that was a very successful fire force. But then after a period, they were withdrawn and replaced by another company. And this then went on. And eventually we were, even the citizen force companies from 2 and 3 Parachute Battalion were being sent up there. The permanent force and national service companies were sent up for 6-week tours. And there were eventually 2 such fire forces there. I think they were Fire Force X-Ray and Zulu, or Yankee and Zulu. I can't remember. But anyway, they were the two South African fire forces in the southern part of Rhodesia, one in the west and one in the east. There was also a battalion of infantry deployed, but they weren't paratroopers. They were under command of Rolanda Frist, and they had their own area that they were operating in. And our 2 companies that were sent up there, the paratrooper companies, we were relieving one another, as I say, every 6 weeks, and in the case of the citizen force, every 4 weeks. They'd be dressed in Rhodesian camouflage. The aircraft that they used were largely South African, but they were painted in Rhodesian livery to look like Rhodesian aircraft. It didn't fool anybody. It really didn't fool anybody. The Rhodesians never had Puma helicopters. Now all of a sudden they've got Pumas that are operating there. The way South Africans wore their uniform was somewhat different to the way the Rhodesians did. And anybody looking at them would say, well, these are not really Rhodesians. This is not the way the Rhodesians wear their uniform, although it's a Rhodesian uniform. The way they spoke, I mean, most of them spoke Afrikaans. And they'd been told, if anybody asks, where do you come from? Tell them you come from Enkeldoorn. Now, Enkeldoorn was a little settlement in Rhodesia where there were quite a lot of Afrikaans farmers. So that's now going to fool people if they say 2 whole companies of troops from Enkeldoorn. I mean, but anyway, that's the way it worked. Also, our troops all used folding stock R1 rifles. And the Rhodesians didn't have folding stock R1 rifles. So, there was so many things. And they gave us all Rhodesian kit except our boots. The boots were South African boots. And the South African boots were very different from the Rhodesian boots. So, it really didn't fool anybody. But officially, they couldn't say, we've got South African troops in Rhodesia. The South African paratrooper fire forces were very successful. Partly because they had Puma helicopters, but also because the troops were very good. They were well trained, they were highly trained, and they were aggressive, and they were looking for action. That's how you selected your paratroopers. It's the sort of person you wanted in your paratroopers. So we had Operation Bola on the go at the moment. Now, we weren't deployed as a fire force inside Rhodesia. We were sitting right on the border. But when the OC arrived, he informed us that there's going to be a big operation inside Rhodesia. And we're going to, even though we hadn't quite completed our training yet, we're going to be involved in this. And this operation was called Melba, Operation Melba. The Rhodesians and the South Africans, the South African intelligence incorrectly said that Muzorewa was going to win the elections because the elections were going to take place then, and that Mugabe had no chance. And of course, that was absolute nonsense. The intelligence guys got that completely wrong, exactly as they would get it wrong with SWAPO in Namibia later as well. But this is what they said, and of course the guys wanted to believe this, so they did. And I think the Rhodesians were also hoping that this is what would happen, because an operation was hatched, and a big plan was hatched between the Rhodesians and the South Africans. That when the elections were held in Rhodesia, in, I think it was February 1980. Because by late 1979, sometime in December, according to the Lancaster House agreements, a ceasefire was declared. And now we had our fire forces there, but now they were not allowed to go into action. They were sitting there waiting, and nothing was happening. So we had 2 companies there from one parab. And then we had 2 companies doing training at Mabaligwe. And Archimur arrived there with the battalion headquarters, and he said, this is the operation that's going to take place. When the election results come out and Muzarewa has won, then the Rhodesians and we are going to carry out a lightning strike. Because part of the agreements for the ceasefire was that all the insurgents would be gathered together in assembly points. And these assembly points, they'd remain in those assembly points until such time as the elections are finished, and then they'd be integrated into a new setup. But the plot that was hatched was that if Muzarewa wins the election, then immediately the assembly points would be attacked. And the insurgents in the assembly points must just be wiped out. It must be an absolute vicious assault on these assembly points, because they were all armed. All these insurgents were armed. And I don't think if you wanted to win the battle, I don't think there'd be any other way of winning it than actually wiping them out. So the Rhodesians had their objectives deeper inside Rhodesia, but the South Africans were in the south. And there was this assembly point that was identified, Assembly Point Juliet, on this riverbank near a mission station. It was only about, I don't think it was more than about 50 kilometers inside Rhodesia from the South African border, closer to the Botswana border. It might have been a little more than 50, I don't know, maybe 80 kilometers, but it wasn't all that far inside. And the operation would now be a parachute operation to drop stop groups around the assembly point. And then the 2 fire forces would be brought in by helicopter, and they would form the assault force, which would then go through the objective. So our troops, which are not fully trained yet, they still had about 4 weeks of training left that they had to do, but they would be dropped as 2 stop lines, and all they had to do was shoot any insurgents that tried to get away from there. Along the river, they had gunship helicopters, which would prevent them from escaping across the river. And the open area of the square that would be established around the base, that's the direction from which the 2 parachute companies would go in by helicopter and carry out the assault. They had Mirages at Messina, waiting at the base over there, and they were going to take off from there. And before the attack went in, before the paratroopers were dropped, the assembly point would be strafed by the Mirages and bombed, so that it would be very well softened up. And then we carried out a rehearsal at Madimbu without the assault companies, just the stopper companies. And we were dropped into the bush around the airfield, and we had to establish stop lines there, and that's how the operation had to be carried out. We were all issued with Rhodesian kit, camouflage. The way that they used to do it was quite, I think, quite ridiculous. But in any case, this is the way they did it. The troops that would be deploying in Rhodesia would be flown to Madimbu. There was a little base set up at Madimbu. The aircraft would land. They'd go onto the far side of the runway. On the far side of the runway, they would strip off all their clothing, all their uniform, pack it into bags, and stand there in their underpants with their rifles and their boots and nothing else. And everything's packed into this bag over here. They'd be allowed to keep their webbing. So their webbing would be on one side, but everything else would be packed into there. And then they would take their webbing and their rifles and cross over the runway to where the base was. And all their stuff would then be collected and put away for them. They'd get that back when they come out of Rhodesia. And when they get to the other side, they'd be issued with Rhodesian kit. And then they'd put on all their Rhodesian stuff and so on. And then they'd climb into an aircraft and be flown to wherever they'd be operating from as a fire force. But in our case, we were issued with the kit and so on in the same way, but we weren't flown into Rhodesia. We stayed behind there, everything ready, all geared up, ready to go in, and now just waiting for the results of the election to come out. The moment it's announced that Muzarewa has won, we were going to go in. The aircraft are parked on the runway. The Mirages are standing by at Louis Trichardt, not Messina, at Louis Trichardt. And the two companies at their fire force bases are waiting with their helicopters. When it's activated, they will go in. We also had a mortar company that was going to be deployed, go in by road and deployed so they could deliver mortar fire on the objective during the attack. And of course, Muzarewa didn't win the election. He got hardly any votes. And Mugabe wiped it. Now, of course, you can say all you want to about whether it was a rigged election and whether this and that or the other, but the fact is that's what happened. So the operation didn't take place. So that was Operation Melbourne. And I was scheduled to go and do a course at Wansai, a mechanized infantry orientation course, because it was deemed necessary that everybody, even paratroopers in the permanent force, had to be orientated for mechanized operations. It was a very good thing because we took part in a lot of mechanized operations, mainly as motorized troops, but still working closely with the mechanized. So it was very good for our officers to go on this course. And my mechanized infantry course was due to start, but I kept very quiet about that because otherwise I would have missed Operation Melbourne, you see. And then when this whole thing came to an end and we were told, no, it's not going to take place, and the South African fire forces have got to withdraw from Rhodesia, and all the kit we've got in Rhodesia has got to come back, and all this Rhodesian kit we've got over here has got to go over that way. I went to the commandant who was in charge of the base, and he had this mountain of Rhodesian kit, of Rhodesian uniforms there. And I said to him, Commandant, I collect camouflage gear. Do you think I could get a set of Rhodesian camouflage? I said, what's going to happen to this? He said, we've got to send it all back to Bulawayo now. So I said, well, do you think I could get a set of it? He said, man, take as many sets as you like. So I got 5 complete sets of Rhodesian camouflage, which I all packed up and packed into my gear, and I kept those, and I've still got those with me in my collection. Most of them. Some of them I've swapped and given away, but I've got most of the stuff. Anyway, I went to the man who was at that stage the second in command at one paraben, Jos Rabi. And I said to him, and he was responsible for, the training aspect and sending guys on course and so on. And I said to him, Commandant, that mechanized infantry course that I was supposed to start yesterday. And his eyes went wide and he said, jy moes daar gewees het. And I said, well, kan ek nog gaan? He said, jy klim nou op 'n vliegtuig en gaan terug. You get on an aircraft now and you go back and you attend that course. Because it already started the day before, you see. So he put me into an aircraft and I had to fly back, and Herbie had to take over the company again, and I had to go back and go and do the course in Bloemfontein. But the interesting thing about that was that where they put me on an aircraft, there was a Dakota flying back to Pretoria. It's the first section. I had to get another lift down to Bloemfontein after that. But I got into the aircraft, and sitting next to me in the aircraft was Jan Breitenbach. Jan Breitenbach was at that stage the second in command of 44 Para Brigade. And 44 Para Brigade, in fact, had just at that stage been deactivated, the headquarters. And Jan was being appointed the SSO parachute operations at Army headquarters, and he would, after that, coordinate the training of the 2 parachute battalions, citizen force parachute battalions. 1 parachute battalion was now no longer part of the brigade. But at the stage that all of this took place, the brigade was still in existence, and Jan Breitenbach was coordinating what was happening in Rhodesia. And he was deployed in Rhodesia. Of course, he was a qualified SAS operator, and whenever he'd go into Rhodesia, he'd put on his uniform with a blue SAS stable and his sand-colored SAS beret and go across. And, you know, he had lots of buddies with the Rhodesians. He'd operated with them while he was in Special Forces, and he knew the Rhodesians very, very well. And he flew back with me. And he was in a foul mood. And I said to him, Colonel, what's wrong? Why are you? And he said, what do you mean, what's wrong? We're withdrawing from Rhodesia now. And I said, well, you know, for the fortunes of war. And he said, listen, I have fought in 5 different wars. I have never lost a battle. And this is the 5th war that I've lost. Interesting comment there. Anyway, Jan Breitenbach was very upset that we hadn't carried out the attack anyway, because he again would have you know, been overseeing what we were doing, probably from a helicopter while we were doing the attack. But anyhow, we went back, and not long after that, I was called into the commanding officer's, Archie Moore's office. And he said to me, with one of the other company commanders, Johan Blou. And he called us in and he said, we've been offered a place on a Pathfinder course with the Israelis. We've been offered 3 places. I want to send the 2 of you and Major Wouter Richu. So the 3 of you are going to Israel to attend the Pathfinder course. Yeah. That was now really good news. I mean, I was getting tired of all the other courses I was going on, but this sounded really good. So that happened. It was the first time I'd been out of the country, other than, you know, Lesotho and Rhodesia, and I'd been to Mozambique and Angola and so on, but I'd never really been abroad. So off we went, flew to Tel Aviv, and we attended this Israeli Pathfinder course. We were joined for the course by an Air Force officer, Major John Church, who had just completed a course on the Black Hawk helicopter in Israel. He then stayed on for the Pathfinder course. And the Israeli Pathfinder approach was very different to ours. They focused more on helicopter operations and parachute operations. Although they did include, you know, DZs and things like that, it was mainly in terms of helicopters. And they dealt with large numbers of helicopters, numbers that we could only dream about. And mostly American helicopters that they used. Well, in fact, it was all American helicopters. At one stage, they'd used French helicopters, but at that stage, they were just using American helicopters, CH-53 and that type of helicopter. So we worked with them in these, and in controlling the helicopters at night, and bringing in a mass of helicopters into a landing zone at night in the dark. And they had, for this special types of what they called a trapeze, which was controlled with with lights, subdued lights that were controlled from a box. And the Pathfinders would select this area that the helicopters could land in and mark it out with a trapeze. And then they would call in the helicopters, and they would illuminate each helicopter's landing site just in time for that helicopter to come in, land, get rid of its troops, and take off again. And it was quite a complicated way of dealing with a lot of helicopters at once, but extremely interesting. And really a wonderful opportunity to see how they operated in a different situation. They took us shooting, they took us on air-landed operations at night with the C-130 and in the desert, and it was really a very interesting course that we did. So we'd finished that, and there was a air supply course which was due to start just after that. And this was more the logistic people that were involved there. But we were quite interested in this. And, you know, we thought, isn't there some way that we can get to stay on this? And so we spoke to the military attaché at the South African Embassy. And he said, let me see what I can do. And he pulled some strings and came back to us and said, yeah, you guys are on the air supply course. So we started the air supply course as well, but we didn't quite finish that. But what I must tell you is that we went a number of times. We had to go to the embassy, and it was quite high up, and you'd get into a lift and go up and so on. And on one occasion, we get into this lift, and Johan Blau and myself are standing there, and this girl gets in. Man, she was stunning, absolutely stunning. And he looks at her and he looks at me and he says in Afrikaans, he says, "Daarom 'n mooi meisie, hè?" So I said to him, "Ja, sy's pragtig." He said, "Ja, ek wens ek kon 'n date met haar reël." Anyway, the next thing is we get to the we still had another 2 or 3 floors to go, but the lift stops and opens, and this girl gets out. And as she goes through the door, she turns around to us and she says, "Baie dankie vir die komplimente, hoor." And she walks. So, you know, you think, you take it for granted and nobody knows what you're talking about. But she understood every word we were saying. So fortunately, we didn't say anything lewd, you know. So anyway, we'd barely started our air supply course, and the message comes: "You guys, you 3, the infantrymen, back to 1 Parabon immediately, urgently. Your OC is very upset that you organized to get on this air supply course. Yeah, now we think we're in big trouble." Anyway, we were flown back at post haste, and we got to Bloemfontein, and we get there and we go to see the OC, expecting to get a real blistering. He wasn't too upset that we'd done that, but he said, "The problem is, I need you people now, because your companies are gone. They're sitting up at Oshivelo. There's a big operation that's going to take place, and you people have got to be there for it. I can't leave you there having a holiday in Israel. You've got to come back." So there we are. That same night, we off, and we got to get on the train, drive up to overnight to Pretoria, and then flown to Grootfontein. From Grootfontein, we had to make our way to Oshivelo. Interesting about that trip, the train trip, when we got near to Sasolburg, the train's going up, we saw an enormous fire at Sassel, an enormous fire. And, you know, we saw, wondered on earth, what on earth's going on over there? And we found out later that it was an MK attack on the Sassel installation. Anyway, we just saw the fire from the distance from the train as we passed by. And we then went on Operation Skeptic, sometimes called Smoke Shell, but Smoke Shell was actually the code name of the objective, that the main objective that had to be attacked. I won't go into detail about that operation. We were in Angola for about 3 weeks. My company was attached to 6-1 Mechanized Battalion Group. Johan Blau's company was attached with some other parachute companies to a temporary battle group called 1-0. And it was a massive, it was at that stage, the biggest mechanized operation that South Africa had done since the Second World War. And we went into Angola in vehicles, and it was a nightmare riding in biffles with all the dust, and riding for hours and hours and hours at night, and bouncing around in the back of those vehicles. And every now and then a vehicle would hit a mine, and they would have to be taken off and repaired, and then join the convoy again and carry on. And it would take hours for all the vehicles to get past to a certain point. And, you know, we had to get our place. And we did all the training at Oshivelo. We did the rehearsals. We got all the orders there. I served there under Commandant Dippies Dippenaar, Johan Dippenaar, an armor man, outstanding commander, really, really good. He gave detailed orders. He did a detailed appreciation. He did everything by the book. And it was such a pleasure to work with a man who did things by the book and did it like that. So it was a wonderful exposure for me to serve under that man for a while. But when the actual attack went in, we were supposed to be picked up by helicopters and then taken to certain areas where we were going to lay ambushes on the other side of the objective. And when the mechanized attack went in and the insurgents tried to escape, we were supposed to cut them down during the escape. That never happened, because somewhere along the line, and to this day, nobody wants to admit guilt, but the fuel for the Alouette gunships had not been brought in time. And the Pumas were ready to fly us in, but the Pumas wouldn't go without having top cover from the gunships. And the gunships couldn't fly because they'd reached that far, but they had to refuel if they wanted to fly some more. And there was no fuel. The fuel hadn't arrived. And they couldn't delay the whole attack, so the attack went in without us. So we had to listen to the fighting on the radio, and it was some heavy fighting. We lost quite a lot of troops in that particular. I think it was something like 13 or something. It was quite a bad, quite a major loss for the SADF. But the operation went in without us, and the next morning we were called forward in our vehicles. And we were told to go and the 6-1 had been fighting on the objective. They'd withdrawn after nightfall. And then the next morning, the objective needed to now be, it still hadn't been taken, but it needed to be mopped up. And nobody really knew what was there. And we were sent in to go and sort it out. It was not, the insurgents had all left. The place was deserted. And we went in, and there was chaos there. There were dead insurgents everywhere. There were weapons lying about. It was an unpleasant task, mopping up the objective afterwards. But then the second phase of the operation was going to be area operations in the area, trying to find all the insurgents that had run away, to try and capture or kill as many of them as possible. And that's what were the next aspect that we were supposed to tackle. But then we were detached from 6-1 Mechanized Battalion Group, my company, and we were attached to Sector 1, to Battle Group 10 under Commandant Chris Serfontein, die Swarte Hand. And we operated with him for most of the rest of the operation. And during the time with him, we had a number of contacts. On occasion, we were detached and sent off on our own to do area operations in a specific area. And we had 1 or 2 contacts during that period and with the insurgents. And then in battle group context, with Chris Serfontein, we occupied numerous towns, Ivali, Mupa. We were sent off to chase the SWAPO, so-called conventional brigade, the mechanized brigade, and met up with them at a place called Tanganova, where we had carried out an attack on them. One of the things I remembered from that attack was we had to call in close air support, and the Impalas came to deliver it. And when they went in, we had to indicate our forward line own troops, because it was thick bush and they couldn't see us down there. And when they came in right over us, and when they opened fire on the enemy, they were right above us. And I can remember the effect of those empty cartridge cases, 30mm cartridge cases, showering down on top of us. Troops, covering themselves, trying to avoid these things, these empty shell cases landing all over the place every time they'd fire a burst if they came in over us. We captured a lot of equipment there. Most of the SWAPO elements hightailed it out, and so we were left with a lot of vehicles. We got a 76mm field gun, a number of other things that we were able to collect there. Jannie Geldenhuys joined the battle group for that particular attack, and he spent the night with us. After the attack, we formed a leaguer and spent the night there, and then we took all the stuff back with us. And then we were moving further south and moving along a road to a place called Mongua. And there our battle group bumped into a FOPLA battle group. Now, we were actually under instructions not to engage FOPLA, to just engage SWAPO, and only engage FOPLA if they attack us. But not to go looking for trouble with FOPLA. FOPLA is the Angolan armed forces. So we tried to stick to that. But in Mongua, it was a battalion plus of FOPLA that were there. And they weren't expecting us and we weren't expecting them. We had taken Mongua a few days earlier, and we thought it was still unoccupied. When we went there, it had been occupied by this battalion group of FOPLA. And so a massive fight ensued as a result of that. And a couple of honoris crux decorations were won by some of the guys. One soldier in C Company, he took his 89mm rocket launcher, and when FOPLA were carrying out an attack on our guys with BTR, armored personnel carriers, he ran right out in front of the BTRs and dropped down on his knee, and I think he took out two of them from the front, just firing his rocket launcher directly at them at point blank range. He got an HC for that. But the battle group had systematically, during the course of the operation, got rid of their armored cars and then got rid of their artillery. And so we didn't have any of that. We just had infantry and some mortars. And the fire that we were getting from the FOPLA, they were outranging us in some cases. They seemed to have a type of Cymbeline radar tracking stuff there, because as soon as our mortars began firing, they picked up immediately where our mortars were, and they silenced our mortars by bringing down fire right on our mortars as well. And then we had to leave, and we were given instructions to break contact and to move out. And we were told to do that because there were the Impalas had seen tanks approaching. And on this occasion, initially the Impalas were brought in to give some close air support, which they did, but these guys had anti-aircraft guns, which made it very difficult for the Impalas. So the Mirages were brought in, and with the Mirages, it was quite amazing to watch it, because the Mirages would swoop, they'd pitch up high and then swoop down to carry out their attack, and the anti-aircraft gunners would traverse around at the attacking Mirages, and the Mirages would release their rockets or strafe with their 30mm cannons. And as they'd swoop away, you'd see where they were. You'd see poof, 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 as the anti-aircraft flak starts exploding behind them. And these guys would then try and traverse after them. But the Mirages were so fast that they were gone. And you'd see these little puffs of smoke in the distance behind them, far away. They never got near the Mirages. anyway, we a combat team from 6-1 Mech was sent to come and help us out, and they met up with us and carted us out. I had a very interesting little, I often laugh about it when I speak to the two people involved. Something that happened at that point. We had in our company 3 89mm rocket launchers. That's the only anti-tank capability we had, which is a very limited anti-tank capability. And when one of the Impalas spotted these tanks coming down from Zangongu, they said to us, you guys better either dig in very deep or you better get the hell out of it because there are tanks on their way. And I got an instruction. I was the depth company, and I got an instruction from the battalion commander. He said to me, Mac, stop those tanks. So I get hold of Herbie. Now, we knew that 6-1 Mech was on its way to come and help pull us out of this because we were in trouble now. And so I call Herbie. And this is where I found out that if you give clear instructions, the instructions will be well understood. And if some people do understand your instructions. So I called Herbie and I said to him, Herbie, take all the 89s. Now, all the 89s is 3. I said, take all the 89s, as much ammo as you can get hold of. I said, and go out along that road over there and lay an ambush. There are tanks coming, and you got to stop them. And Herbie looks at me and he says, I beg your pardon, Captain. Then I knew Herbie understood exactly what I'd said, and he knew that I was giving him an impossible task. So I said to him, Herbie, don't argue with me and don't give me lip. Just do as I say. Take the things and go and lay the ambush. So Herbie goes off, and I see him. He gets the guys together, and I see him running with these guys. Each guy carrying a couple of rockets with him, and the 89 over the one guy's shoulder, and these 6 guys with the 3 rocket launchers and Herbie. And I thought to myself, you know, if I survive this, I'm never going to see them again because they're not going to survive it. There's no way they're going to stop those tanks. But anyway, they're on their way. As things happened, Herbie was expecting the tanks to come. He heard them crashing through the bushes, and he had the guys ready. And it turned out to be 6-1 mechanized battalion group that was coming. The tanks were on their way, but these guys were ahead, and they broke through the bushes just there. And Herbie spotted them in time and realized it was them, and it was with their 89mm or their 90mm anti-tank platoon that had come through first, and they managed to get these guys. They recognized them in time. They didn't open fire on them, and they brought them back to us, and then they got the rest of the battalion group, the battle group got together, and we moved out. And when we moved out, Commandant Serfontein said to me, Mac, jy dek die agterhoede. You cover the rear guard. You come out. The other guys are going, because we had quite a few wounded guys, and they needed to be evacuated, and the helicopters couldn't land because of the anti-aircraft fire and the engagement that was taking place. So the engagement was broken, and the guys moved out, and now I had to wait with the other guys. And we knew the tanks are coming. Now, I can't give Herbie the same task again, because as Company 2, I see the movement as his responsibility, and he's now getting my guys all ready to do the movement. So I called my company sergeant major, Sergeant Morkel. His nickname was Snorre, Mustaches. And I called Snorre, and I said to him, Snorre, luister nou mooi, listen carefully. I said, there are tanks coming. I said, if they reach us before the guys have all withdrawn, we've got to stop them. Take all the 89s, that's 3 of them, and all their rockets. And I said, and lay an ambush behind you. and make sure that we can get away. And that's when I realized that although Herbie had understood my instructions implicitly, Snorre really didn't understand my instructions, because he said to me, "No problem, Captain." So he took the guys and he went and laid his ambush. But fortunately, everybody got away, and I could call them in. And they got on their buffel, and we headed out. And we were able to get out of Angola without being annihilated by the tanks, fortunately. So that was Skeptic, which I've only really covered very, very briefly. Of course, the next operation, which I want to say something briefly about, was Operation Klipkop. We returned to South Africa, back to Bloemfontein, and then we were sent up to Ondangwa as Fire Force, and we had to deploy over there again. And we hadn't been there very long, and I was told, you've got to detach a company to the Kaukuveld. Not a company, a platoon. So one of my hawk groups had to go to the Kaukuveld. And then they said, one of your other hawk groups has got to go to, your other platoons has got to go to 5-4 Battalion. So I had to detach them there. In the end, I was sitting with just one hawk group at Ondangwa. And I was a bit cheesed off about this. And then the SWAPO carried out an attack on Ruacana. And it was a wegsaanbestoking. I forget what the term is in English, but they engaged from a distance, and they fired, I can't remember, rockets or mortars into Ruacana. There were fortunately no casualties. They destroyed a couple of civilian houses. I think the ops room at Ruacana got a hit, but there were no casualties. But you know, it was quite a brazen attack on Ruacana. The South African authorities decided that something must be done about this. We're going to have to show they can't be allowed to do this with impunity. We're going to have to show that we've got the initiative, and they're not going to be allowed to get away with this. Now, not far from Ruacana, maybe, I don't know, 35, 40 kilometers, maybe a bit more, inside Angola, there was a little town called Chitado. And Chitado was being used by SWAPO as a staging post to infiltrate insurgents into the Kaukuveld. And what they would do is they would bring them to Chitado and then issue them with the last of what they needed. And Chitado was only about 5 or 8 kilometers from the Kunene River in the mountains, this little village in the mountains. And they would then take them down a pathway to the river and then take them across the river by boat. Now, the South African intelligence knew about this. They had received intercepts and so on, so they knew this was going on. And they wanted to sort out Chitado. But first of all, they needed to get as much intelligence as possible. So a special forces team was deployed to carry out surveillance of the place and see exactly what is going on and what take photographs and determine the routine and so on and report back. And they were deployed there. It was interesting. They were the team that was deployed there. It was the first time that South Africa ever used the hey-ho technique when they placed those special forces in there. We didn't know that at the time, but one of the guys who dispatched them, Koos Moorcroft, who'd actually trained them, he told me about it many years later when we were discussing it. He said that the special forces, they jumped from about 32,000 feet and opened their parachutes almost immediately, very far from where Chitado was. And then they glided in at night to a spot much closer landed, buried their parachutes, and then made their way up onto a little kopje overlooking Chitado, and from there they did the surveillance. And they brought back a lot of information about Chitado. But a decision had not been made at that stage to do anything about Chitado yet. But when SWAPO carried out this attack on Ruacana, it was decided that this is a good reason to carry out the attack on Chitado, and to disrupt this the flow of insurgents into the Kahuku land. So I was called into Sector 10, and Chris Serfontein, who is the SO1 operations, gave me a briefing. The intelligence guy came, and Dave Drew gave a detailed intelligence report. They had very good photographs, they had maps, they had aerial photos. They had a lot of information on Chitado. And I was told that my company is going to carry out a helicopter assault on Chitado. And that would be done, overall in charge of the thing would be Chris Serfontein, but the actual assault on the ground, that would be my responsibility. So I had to go and work out a plan for this, which I did, and I presented that to Chris Serfontein, and he accepted it. He was not very fond of the paratroopers, although he'd had paratroopers under his command on many occasions. He was not very fond of them. I must say, I found out in later years that he had gone to do the parachute course, but he was a very, very good rugby player in his youth. And when I was doing research in the archives, I actually found that he'd gone to do the parachute course. He'd done the selection and passed it, and started the hangar training. And he was playing for Griquas, I think, at that stage. And then he was pulled off of the course, and he was sent back to Kimberley, and he had to go and play rugby. And he was never able to complete the course. Whether he was never allowed to, or never given the opportunity to, or he was too busy, I don't know. But the fact is that he should have been a paratrooper himself, but he never was. So he seemed to have a bit of an attitude towards the paratroopers, and the paratroopers didn't like him very much. And he made it very clear that he didn't like them very much either. But I think it was much show. I think he actually really liked the paratroopers, because he was a very aggressive commander. And I think, he liked having aggressive troops under his command. Anyway, we had to carry out this attack. It was, there weren't enough helicopters for me to put my whole company down. They told me, Chris Serfontein told me, we'll bring back all your troops, and you get together at Ruacana the day before the attack. So I said to him, well, what about a rehearsal? He said, man, there's no time for nonsense like that. You just go in and do the attack. So anyway, we went to Ruacana, and we got all my troops together and briefed them as to what they had to do. And I had to leave some of them behind. I could only take 60 troops in with me with the first wave. We only had enough helicopters to take in 60 troops. There were gunships. We flew early in the morning. It was not quite light yet when we left, and we took off at Ruacana, and we flew down over the escarpment. I could see the Ruacana Falls in the distance, and we flew on the Southwest Africa side, the Namibian side, and then followed the Kunene River, low level, just above the water. And when we reached the little dry river stream bed that came down from Chitado, the helicopters banked and followed the stream up. And when we came to Chitado, I could see the gunships already circling around and firing on Chitado, giving suppressive fire onto Chitado. And Chitado had defenses. There were two platoons in Chitado. One was a TGFA, which is a Frontier Guard platoon, and the other one was a FAPLA platoon. And then there was the SWAPO elements that were involved in channeling the insurgents across. And I had 60 troops. So, it's in every possibility, they even had more troops there than what I did, but I don't really know how many they had in the end. But they were expecting a mechanized attack from the direction of the Kaluek Dam and the and the Ruacana Falls. In other words, the attack would be coming from the east. Behind them in the west, there was no way of getting across the river, and to the south, there was no way of getting across the river. For some reason, they hadn't anticipated an airborne attack. So they dug trenches on the side, on the eastern side, and they were prepared. The mountains behind them on the western side were their protection there, and most of them were facing in that direction. And the helicopters came over and then delivered suppressive fire. And we came in from the south and moved around to an LZ, which I'd identified from the photographs on the sort of southwestern side. The helicopters put us down. We were able to, and you know, it was quite exciting going in. I was standing looking over the flight engineer who was sitting between the two pilots, looking through, and you could see the helicopters buzzing around there, and the Alouettes, and could see the smoke coming up in from the little village, and you could see the village itself over there. The village, the locals living in the village, there was hardly any locals living. The village was deserted. The locals were living in little kraals outside because there was nothing in the village. The village had been captured and broken down and destroyed and so on by FNLA and UNITA and FN and MPLA, all their forces during their civil war. That village had been absolutely, it was just a whole lot of broken down buildings, but it had soldiers there. And when we landed, we debussed from the helicopters and immediately formed up behind the trees, and I gave the command to attack. And it was a slight uphill that we had to cross, and quite a few of the troops in the village had shifted their position now, and the first building that we would meet was in front of us was still in use, and that was where the building that SWAPO used to keep their supplies in, that they used to issue the guys with when they had to cross over the river. And we attacked directly towards that building, and we ran into quite a lot of hostile fire. But the troops were magnificent. They did fire and movement across this open area. And there was constant fire from our side, and the troops were going down and moving, covering one another as they moved. And the movement was bringing us closer and closer. I was urging them on as we were going. And then something happened that it was quite it made me think very deeply about the whole issue of war, because I was now trying to apply the principles of the attack. We had fire support from the gunships. These guys were in buildings up in front of us. And there was a guy hiding behind some bushes up ahead. And as we were getting closer to the buildings, this guy had an FN rifle, 7.62 rifle. And we hadn't seen him there. And as we got closer, he fired. And one of my machine gunners on my right, Koos van Heerden, got a bullet in the groin, and he went down. And one of the guys yelled at me, and he said, "Kaptein, hulle Koos is geskiet." And I had to apply the principles that we were taught. And I yelled at them. I said, "Los die man. Die medics sal vir hom sorg," because normally you apply buddy aid as soon as one of your guys is injured. I said, "Los die man. Die medics sal hom kry. Gaan aan met die aanval. Carry on with the attack. Leave the man." That wasn't easy to do, because what do you do if a guy next to you is shot? You want to, but we're in the middle of an assault. You got to leave him, and it was hard for me to say that to myself. They obeyed immediately. They moved on. They carried on with the attack. We couldn't risk losing the momentum of the attack. Maintaining the momentum is one of the principles of the attack, and you've got to apply that. So you can't stop for a guy who's been wounded. Even if he's mortally wounded, you've got to maintain, because if you stop and start giving him attention, probably more guys are going to be injured and wounded and killed. So you just keep going. And we moved across there and entered and then we had to do house clearing. And we were doing house clearing through the area. And there were two incidents that occurred during the house clearing, which in retrospect are quite funny. But at the time, they both made me very, very, very angry. What I want to say about when Koos was injured, and I'm still in contact with Koos. He lives in Bloemfontein. I see him when I go up there. He walks with a limp. He was in hospital for a long time. But fortunately for him, when he was in hospital and he arrived in hospital in 111 mil, and he was so badly injured, and he was in tremendous pain. And this nurse comes when he comes along. This nurse comes along to him and says to him, she could see he was badly injured. She says, "Hoe gaan het met jou?" And he turned around and he said to her, "Luister, hoe die F dink jy gaan dit met my? Ek is geskiet, man." And he climbs into her and gives her a mouthful and so on. And, you know, she's a bit taken aback, but anyway, she sorts him out and so on and goes through. Now, I won't go into all the detail, but let me just say in closing that nurse, Annette, is the nurse that he ended up marrying. And they're both living happily in Bloemfontein to this day with their kids and so on. Kids are all married and so on as well. But that's how his romance started. So. But back to what was going on at Chitado. Now we're moving through the buildings, and I've got sections on both sides going through and clearing the buildings and you know, indicating, because they had a sort of a main road going through it. Well, it was a small place. It went maybe 30 buildings altogether. It wasn't a big place at all. But they had this one road going through the middle, and a real little country dorp, Portuguese, you know, colonial hamlet. Anyway, I come around this one building, and there's a fairly big building and a big window up near the top there. And the window had several panes in it. And I see that one of my troops, we had R4 rifles. And he's standing there with his rifle and he's shooting each pane. I yelled at him. I said, "What the heck do you think you're doing there?" Anyway, he when he saw me, you know, he jumped and he quickly ran into the next building to continue the house clearing. But when we were finished the whole attack, we've now got to. I sent the troops out, and they went into the bushes around the area, and they picked up quite a few insurgents that were hiding in the area and shot some of them, captured some of the others. The others were doing mopping up inside the house. We were busy consolidating just the other side, this little village, and the helicopter lands with Chris Serfontein in it. And he's livid, shouting and yelling at me. And he says to me, "Mac, waar's daai vlag? Where's that flag? Ek soek daai vlag, gee hom vir my." I looked at him, I said, "What are you talking about, sir? What flag?" He says, "Don't think I didn't see what your people did." I said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about, sir." Anyway, what apparently happened, and of course he's in one of the gunships up above here, so he saw what was happening on the ground. The MPLA headquarters was the old ayuntamento, the municipality that the Portuguese had over there, the municipal building. And they had this headquarters, and in front of it was a flagpole with an Angolan flag fluttering on top of the flagpole. And apparently, when the troops had moved through all these buildings and they reached the town square, because the town square was in front of this place, the troops decided they want this flag. And the other troops gave covering One of the troops was nominated by them. And he runs out from amongst the buildings while the other troops are firing whenever they see any chance of anything being. And this guy runs to the flagpole. And he gets the flagpole, he flips open his bipod on his R4, puts the thing down on the ground, unties the flag, and lowers the flag. Loosens it and stuffs it inside his parachute smock or his shirt, whatever he had on then, grabs the rifle, fires a couple of shots, and runs back to the other guys. Now, Chris Serfontein in the helicopter had watched this going on. And so he says to me, "Ek soek daai vlag." So I said, "Well, Commandant, ek weet nie daarvan nie. I don't know about it, but I'll tell them to bring the flag." So I get on the radio and I tell my platoon commanders. Meantime, the helicopters have gone back, fetched the rest of my company, brought them in, and they came through and they did the actual mopping up inside the town while the other guys were securing the area on the outside and looking for people who were hiding in the bush. And at this point, the platoon commanders come back to me and they say, each one reports, no flag in our platoon, sir. No, our whole group. No, we haven't got a flag. No, none of the troops know anything about a flag, sir. Now, Serfontein is standing in next to me and he's listening to this. And he says, "Julle donse paratroopers, julle lieg." You're lying, you paratroopers. You, one of you has got that flag. I want that flag. No, they don't know anything about a flag. I said to him, "So I said, ek gaan julle troepe deursoek. I'm going to search your troops. I want that flag." I said, "So you'll have to do it when we get back." So they're all in position now. I can't. Now they decided that they want to get maximum publicity out of this thing. They bring in engineers, and the engineers are going to bring demolitions, and they're going to blow up the SWAPO building from where they do the transmission of these troops across the river, moving them across the river and so on. And they're going to blow up the MPLA headquarters as a sign to the MPLA that they mustn't host SWAPO. But they also bring a whole lot of journalists that they'd notified beforehand in Windhoek that there's something going on. They flew them all up to Ruakana, and then they brought them in by helicopter. Now, my troops have got to sit around here. You see, now we had in the intelligence we got, we had been told that there's an armored force about 100 kilometers away in the wild direction of Zangongo. But it was quite clear from the road and the terrain that had to be crossed and so on. There's no way this armored force would get there in a hurry. So if we went in, took the place, did what we wanted to, destroyed what we wanted to, took the documents we wanted to, and got out of there, there'd be no problem. But now I'm told, no, we're going to sit here now until all the journalists are in, and they're going to have a look around, and they're going to take photographs, and they're going to interview the troops, and they're going to find out, and I want them to speak to some of the prisoners that you've got. So I was getting quite, but I'd taken precautions. I'd made sure that we brought our 3 89mm rocket launchers with us. So we had those with us as well. And Commandant Serfontein is standing next to me, waiting for these other helicopters to bring all the people in. And I'm getting increasingly agitated. And one of my troops walks past. He was I think he was a Swede. If he wasn't a Swede, he was of Swedish descent, I think. Justin Roborg Sondergaard. He was an anti-tank gunner, and he was good. He really knew how to handle that 89mm. He was very, very good with it. And he walks past, and he's got his 89 over his shoulder, and he's carrying his R4. And Chris Serfontein looks at him and he says to him, "Mac, what nonsense is this bringing the 89mm rocket launchers along? What do you bring that sort of thing on an operation like this?" So I said to him, "Sir, we don't know what we're going to find here. We might have to tackle a bunker or something, and those tanks up the road there, they could come down here. He said, they'll never get here in time. And I said, well, sir, just in case, I thought I'd bring the rocket launchers along. He says, man, those people of yours, they probably don't even know how to use those things, man. And I see Sondergaard turn around and look at him like this, because he's overhearing this conversation, and he looks at the man like this. And I said, Commandant, those guys know how to use that. So he says, that water tower over there, I bet you a beer he wouldn't be able to hit that water tower. So I said to him, Commandant, I don't drink alcohol, but if you make it a Coke, the bet's on. He said, okay, Coke. So I said, Sondergaard, call your number 2. So he calls the guy, he wasn't far away, he calls him, brings him along, and he's got the rockets with him. And I said to him, kneeling position. He goes down. I said, water tower, 200 meters, in the middle, 1 round, load. The number 2 loads it. And I said to Sondergaard, fire. Wham! Right in the middle, a big hole appears. The water tower didn't have water in. I mean, it hadn't been working for years, but so there was no water in it. But it had this hole right through the middle of this, the water tower, the tank on the top. And I turned around and I said, Coke vanaand, Commandant. So he smiled at me. He said, so you get your Coke. So but he was having us on, he was just trying to goad us, just trying to see how we'd react. Anyway, a little while later, he says to me, I want a pistol. I said, what pistol? So he said, I want a Russian pistol. I want a pistol as a souvenir. Tell your troops they must find a pistol for me. There's got to be a pistol in here somewhere. So I get on the radio and I get hold of the platoon commander and I tell the guys who are working in doing the mopping up and so on. I said to them, the commandant wants a pistol. See if you can find a pistol somewhere. Look around, see. So they're checking and seeing what they can and come back to me. And no, they can't. He says, there's got to be a pistol. I got to find a pistol. And eventually the guys come along and they say, we found a pistol. So it's an old Tokarev, but it's rusted. And it's unused. You couldn't even pull the action back. It's so rusted. And he looks at it. He says, "Is this the best you could do? You bloody paratroopers are useless, man. Look at you. Look, this is the best you can produce for me." So I said, "Colonel, I'm sorry. We can only give you what there is. I mean, we're not responsible for the pistols." So he takes the thing and he said, I'll see if I can get it cleaned up. I'll get the Tiffies to see if they can fix it for me. So anyway, that was that. And when the journalists arrived, he had the buildings blown up so they could see it and take photographs. And he let them fly in the helicopter and take photographs from the air with clouds of smoke going up. They walked around all over. They spoke to some of the civilians that were living in the area. They spoke to the troops, they interviewed them, all of that sort of stuff. I think what the troops told them, they probably didn't like. That's not what they wanted to hear, because, that sort of stuff didn't appear in the newspapers, except some of it appeared in the South African newspapers, but on the whole, they didn't, there were international guys there. They never said anything about this because I don't think they liked the truth. Anyway, there were a couple of civilians that were injured, also killed. I don't know how many, and there weren't many because there were not many civilians there, but there were some that were killed. There was a young boy who was injured by shrapnel from the 20mm cannons in the helicopters, and he was flown by the helicopters. The flew him and of course my guy who had been injured and flew them back to Oshakati so that they could be treated. And then that guy was brought back. I don't know where they put him down. I don't think they would have brought him all the way back to Chitado, but they would have probably put him somewhere nearby. And then we were withdrawn. And that was the end of that particular assault. My troops did magnificently well. I was most impressed with the way they did it. And Chris Serfontein was very happy with the operation as a whole. He tried to pretend that we really didn't know what we were doing and so on. But he actually, you could see he was actually very pleased with the troops. So then we returned to Ondangwa, and we carried on with Fire Force actions. It wasn't long before I had to go back for another course. Anyway, it wasn't long after that there was a big change in the setup at 1 Parachute Battalion. And I was taken from the company and made the adjutant. The battalion expanded to the size of a 2-battalion regiment, plus a parachute training facility, a parachute packing facility, and so things were just getting too big. So it was actually much bigger than a battalion. It was a regiment, but they maintained the name 1 Parachute Battalion. And the colonel, the lieutenant colonel, the commandant, who was the OC, was promoted to a full colonel. And 2 commandants were brought in, Chris LaRue and James Hills, who were both commandants at that stage and had both been commanding their own battalions. They were brought in and each made in charge of one of the two wings. There was an operational wing of 4 companies, and there was a training wing of 4 companies. And I was appointed as Archie Moore's adjutant. It says a lot for that, with all the issues that I had with him in the past, that he chose me to be his adjutant. But that brings me to another very important part of my term as a regimental officer with 1 Parachute Battalion, and some very interesting things that took place there. But I think we should end this session about here, if it's okay with you, Chris.
I must tell you, I've been waiting so long for somebody to tell us about paratrooper operations. Because for the rest of us looking from outside, bunch of people who sit around at the airfield, jump into choppers, steal the spoor and the contact, of course is wrong. So I'm really glad, sir, that you could enlighten us here on the different operations. Most of them, I think few people even heard about. So thank you for that. I really, really appreciate it. But I have a few questions, as always. I made some notes while you were talking.
Yeah, sure.
The first one's very easy, sir. Did you ever get to Stellenbosch to get your degree in person from a professor?
Yes, I'd actually, perhaps I should have mentioned that, because that was a little anecdote on its own. The graduation was scheduled for a time which I thought would be a fairly quiet time between our scheduled deployments. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be in Bloemfontein for this. I should be, so I can go down. So I went to see the OC, Archie Moore, explained it to him, and he said, no, it's not a problem. If you're here, you can go down. You don't have to take leave. The military gives you opportunity to go down. You can go down. I assume you want to take your wife down. And so I said, yeah, I'd like to take my family down. Her parents are down there. She can spend time with her parents. And so he said, no problem. But what happened was we got this instruction to do this attack on Camp 52. Now, that was a week before the graduation was scheduled. And, so we flew up, and I thought, well, if we're going to do this attack, hopefully we'll be back in time for me to be able to go and do it. And then the attack was cancelled, aborted at the last minute. The guys who were standing in the door actually saw the aircraft going in to carry out the strike. So it was a real last-minute abortion of an attack that was supposed to take place. But anyway, when we eventually went back, I thought, well, thank goodness, now at least I'm going to be able to get down to Stellenbosch. No, there's another more intelligence coming through, and there are more objectives. We must stand by. We're going to be flown up at short notice. So now we're waiting. And now comes, and I can't remember when the graduation was, whether it was Friday or Saturday, but anyway, it was, we're getting closer to that now. My troops all want to go on leave. And they need a pass. And no, you stay right where you are. You're not going anywhere. Eventually they say, okay, stand down, you can let your troops go. So I let the troops go. And now I'm getting ready to go to drive down to Bloemfontein, to Stellenbosch. And next thing is, Chris LaRue calls me. He says, McGill, we've just got a signal from Army headquarters. The attack on the new bases they found is on. So you've got to get your troops back. I said to him, sir, they've only just left. He said, you've got to get them back. You better start phoning. So Herbie and I went and sat in the duty room with a telephone, and we phoned every single troop's home. And if they weren't home yet, they were told as soon as they get home, they turn around and they come straight back. And they did. Within a day, all the troops were back. They came back from leave. Now, that impressed Potchefstroom a great deal. He thought that was great, that the troops. But this was thanks to James Hills. This is the way he trained the troops. They were absolutely disciplined. So they were back for some of them could have stayed and said, no, I never got the message, and so on. They all came back. But now we've said, all right, it's on hold. It doesn't look as if it's going to take place. So now we're sitting around waiting. Now, I haven't cancelled my graduation. I'm not even going to graduate in absentia. I'm just not going to be there. And, the university's going to be fed up with me. And anyway, what do I do? So we're waiting and nothing happens. And I keep going into the battalion headquarters to find out can I send the troops? Can I go down to? So Potchefstroom says to me, listen, you've got to just bite tight and do the best you can. Stick around here. Even if we only hear, this is now 2 days before I'm due to graduate. I said, even if we only get a stand down on the morning before your graduation, I will arrange for the regimental fund to buy 2 plane tickets for you and your wife to fly down so that you can attend the graduation. So I said, well, thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. I don't know what I'm going to do about my kids, but anyhow, it just looks as if it's not going to happen. So we go in. My little girl is so, Melanie, she was so excited about going to see Granny and Grandpa and going down to Cape Town and so on. And now we've told her doesn't look as if it's going to happen. And the day before, I was due to graduate. We're still sitting there, and I get I get a message from that evening. I get a message to say, come through to the headquarters. And so Anne takes me through, and in the car when she's taking me, with the 2 kids are in the car as well, and Melanie, who was at that stage, I think 4 years old. She says, Daddy, why can't we go to Cape Town? Why won't they let you go? So I said, no, because I have to go away. It's part of my job, sweetheart. She said, but Baden, this is now one of our neighbors, was I think, I can't remember, I think he was a tiffy at the command headquarters. And he was living in the same block of flats as us. She says, but but Biden's in, Dad, his daughter was a friend of mine. And he said, but my little friend's father, Biden, he's in the army and he never has to go away. So I said, yes, sweetheart, but Biden, Uncle Biden is not a paratrooper. Your daddy's a paratrooper. That's why I have to go away. So she keeps quiet for a while, and then she says, Daddy, why did God make you a paratrooper? How do you answer a child a question like that? Anyway, when I got to the unit, they said, it looks like you're going to have to go. So, start getting your troops ready. So I give the troops, they say, we're going to be flying tomorrow. So I give the troops the instructions and so on, and I head back home. And we're sitting now, Anne's feeling very sorry for herself. And she was really looking forward to seeing her parents. And the kids are upset, and I'm feeling a bit fed up now as well. Because it's on, off all the time. And the next thing is there's a knock at the door. And it's Chris LaRue, the Battalion 2IC. And he says to me, McGill, hulle het gesê ons moet afstaan. They've told us we can stand down. But that could change at any minute. Get in your car and take your family and go now. Drive now, before they change their mind. So I said, but sir, it's petrol rationing. I won't have enough petrol to get there. He said, here's a letter that I've written for you. Take it to the police. They'll give you a permit. And you can get petrol along the way. Boy, we packed up that car within minutes. We had the kids and we set off, and we were on our way down to I went to the police, I got my permit, and we left directly from Park Station Police Station, and we were Park Street Police Station, and we were on our way, and we drove. And I had a little Fiat 124, a small Fiat, and we were crammed in with all our stuff, and we drove down. And I drove through the night. Because the next night is my graduation, the next evening, and I've still got to go and arrange my toga and my hood and all that sort of stuff. How am I possibly going to get this? But anyway, let me just get to Cape Town first, so that I can offload my wife's father was also in the military, and they lived in the military base in Wynberg, and I just wanted to take them all there, and then I'd sort out my thing. And I was so tired, and I had to stop several times just to sleep for half an hour, and then we'd carry on. Other side, Beaufort West, we get a puncture. So by now it's dawn is broke. We get to Laingsburg, and I see another one of my wheels is nearly flat, and so I got to stop, and I got to get that wheel repaired. And then we left again, and now it's getting on. It's getting later and later, and we drive, and eventually I get to Cape Town and to Wynberg and to where Anne's parents are in the military flats there, and it's already mid-afternoon, and I just have time to. And now we've arranged that Anne and her father will come and attend my graduation. But I've got to get there first. And things are really late now. And as luck would have it, their next door neighbor, their daughter was also graduating that same night. But she's already in Stellenbosch, and she's been arranging all her stuff, and now they're going through to Stellenbosch. So Anne and her father will come a little later, but they were going to go. They said they'll leave a little earlier for me so that I can get there earlier. So I hop in the car with them. Now I've dressed in my number one dress for the whole occasion and so on, my red beret on and so on. And we drive through, and we get through to a place called Lyndock, which is sort of between, Somerset West and Stellenbosch. Actually, you turn off round about Easter River area and you head towards Stellenbosch. And we get to that area, and their car boils. And I look, it's almost time for the graduation to start. I haven't even got my cup and my toga or anything yet. I don't know what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to make it. And they said, oh, shucks, we'll have to see if we can get some, at one of these farms, if we can get some water and see, but we're not going to make it in time. I said, well, sorry, I can't stay and help you, but thanks for the lift anyway. And I get onto the road, and there I am, gooi duim, this captain in his uniform, but he's trying to hitch a lift. And I got a lift, and I got through to, and it was at the what's that big sports stadium in Stellenbosch? Where all the rugby is played. I can't remember that. Anyway, in that big hall over there, that's where the graduation's taking place. And I arrived there, and all the people are lined up in their groups, the various faculties, and they're all wearing their togas, and they've got their cups on, or they're carrying their hood over their shoulder, or their arm, and they're all talking excitedly, and the people are all gathering inside at the hall, and now we've all got to be marched in, and take our seats, and I'm there in my uniform, but I got nothing. And I'm looking around, and I'm asking people, and nobody can help me, and they say, no, you can only hire these things at the place in town, and they closed now. You won't be able to. So what am I going to do now? And then I hear a comment from somebody behind me, and this guy says, "Wie's daai ou met daai lelike beret? Who's that character with that ugly beret on his head?" That's all I needed at that stage. Now, and I spin around, and I'm about to give this guy a mouthful, and I look at him, and he was one of the corporals I knew in 2 Parachute Battalion. Now he's just pulling my leg. He knew exactly what beret it was. He probably knew that it was me standing there. And he says, "Kaptein, hoe gaan dit met jou?" And I said to him, "Smitty, jy moet my nou help." He was a lecturer at Stellenbosch. Said, "Jy moet my nou help. Ek het 'n toga en 'n kap nodig. I need a toga and I need a hood to graduate. I've got to go and graduate now." So he said, "Don't worry, Captain. We're going to sort it out." So he says, "Yeah, I've got to wear this toga here, but I don't need the thing. You take my toga." He takes it off and he gives it to me. So I put his toga on. Now I just got it. He says, "What color is the hood for the BMill degree?" So I said, I don't know. So I said, let's go and ask the BMill guys. So there are quite a few BMill guys there. So we went over there. So he looks at the hood, and he says, he says, that's almost the same color as the BSc hood. So I said, oh. So he says, let's go over to where the BSc guys are. We went over to the BSc guys, and he gets one of them that he knows, and he says to him, "Look, you guys are being capped earlier than the BMill guys. When you've been capped, can you send your hood down for this captain? He needs a hood to get captain." The guy said, "Yeah, no problem." So we get marched in. I haven't got a hood, but I've got my toga on, and I can join the other BMill guys, and we all take our seats, and Anne and her dad arrive and join all the other people. And I see the BSc guys go up, and I see this guy. He gets capped, and he comes down. And when he comes down, he rolls up his hood. He speaks to the guy next to him and sends it to him, and it gets passed down, and here comes my hood. So I take the BSc hood and I put that over my arm, and now I'm ready to graduate. So when I was called up and capped, and they put the hood over me, I graduated with a BSc hood, even though it was a BMill degree. So that was resolved. And then the next day, I think it was on a Friday that we graduated. The next day, the Saturday, I went through to a garage and got all my tires sorted out and so on. And then we got to start heading back. And so we had to start driving back. And I tell you, I was so tired already at that stage. And we get to Worcester. We're driving through Worcester. No, not through Worcester, on the I think it's the N1. And we're going past Worcester. And there I see 2 paratroopers on the side of the road. And it's 2 of my troops. So, we drove past them and pulled over. They didn't realize it was me, of course. But these two guys, the one guy was, they were very relaxed. Now, in those days, the troops still used to wear a tunic and step-out clothes and so on. And his tires pulled loose, and his beret had sort of pulled over his eyes like this, and a jacket over his arm because it's quite hot. And they come running up to the window, to say where they're going to Bloemfontein. They stop, and they see it's me. And both guys jump back, you see, and the one guy who's reasonably well dressed, he salutes. The other guy salutes with his tie crooked and his beret over his eyes and looking like a real scruff, So they thought they were in big trouble. And I said to them, guys, we can't give you a lift. I've got no room in this little car. But if you're delayed, if you don't get back in time, don't worry about it. We'll sort it out when you get there. And off we went. And I still see those guys, and they remind me of this. And they say to me, "Yeah, we would have been in big trouble because we never made it back in time. But fortunately, you stopped when you saw us there, and fortunately, you didn't have us on orders because our uniforms were in such a mess." So yes, I did graduate in the end. That's a long story answered to your question.
No, that's fascinating, sir. I just want to tell to the folk perhaps who don't know South Africa that well, that's about 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles probably, between Bloemfontein and Cape Town, depending on how you drive.
Yeah.
And in those days when we didn't have aircon in the cars and you go through the Karoo, you often drive at night actually because it gets really warm, really, really warm.
Yeah, no, it was no pleasure driving through the Karoo.
No, not at all. But I must ask you, sir, when you got your PhD and the other advanced degrees, no such troubles, or could you make it on time?
No, when I got my honours degree, I was kept in abstention. I was deployed again then. I was already a colonel, but I was deployed in the Natal Midlands in the Richmond area, and so I couldn't attend that. But it didn't worry me too much because the first one was very important. For when I got my master's degree, I was living here in Port Elizabeth, and Anne and I flew up to Pretoria, graduated with UNISA, and I went to that. And that there were no particular hassles there. In fact, my promoter was so pleased with me that he took Anne and I out for dinner that evening. So that was quite nice. And when I got my doctorate, my PhD, it was also through UNISA, but they had their graduation in Cape Town because they tend to, because they have so many students, they graduate in graduation ceremonies in different areas. So the nearest one to us was in Cape Town. And so I went through there with Anne. And as a graduate student, I was allowed to have 3 people to attend the graduation. So Anne came again. Lou Gerber, who was the OC of 3 Parachute Battalion, who's a good friend of mine. I invited him to come. He'd followed my studies very carefully, both for my MA and my PhD. I appreciated that. And then a friend of mine who was at the girls' high school when I was at the boys' high, George Pringle, she'd been very encouraging when I at times with the PhD is really hard work. And there are times, and my promoter told me that's common to happen when people get right to the end. They've only got a little way to go, and then they give up because they just can't handle it anymore. And there were many times when I felt, this thing's just too much. It's because it's mentally it's taxing. It's a very, very demanding thing, and the pressures that are put on you to make sure that you do it correctly and do it in a way that will earn you the PhD, they're tremendous. So there were times when I really felt like giving up. I didn't want. And George used to say to me, "You carry on. You get this done. Don't give up." So I appreciated that. So I invited the 3 of them to come. Anne and the other 2 to come, and they attended my PhD graduation. And again, there was no issue with that. And it was the PhD was quite special because they make it, they sort of make an exception. You know, it's the promoter gets up there and the supervisor, and he reads a short description of what your thesis was about, and you know, and gives some background and so on, which was very nice. And you know, I think there were only about 3 of us who graduated with PhDs that night, so it was very special. And my supervisor, who is retired now, as far as I know, but he was very chuffed because he said to me, "You are my 21st doctoral student," which is quite an achievement for him to have led 21 people through doctoral studies, because it's quite demanding on a supervisor too. Because he's got to check everything that you do and keep correcting you here and telling you to do, and this is the way you should do it, and you should do it that way, and so on. And what people don't understand is a supervisor doesn't tell you what your content must be. He just tells you how you must do this, and perhaps if you word it like this, it would sound better. But he doesn't dictate to you. It's your PhD. It's not his PhD. And people don't understand that. They think that the supervisor tells you what you must do and what you must say, and he doesn't do that at all. So, and Greg Cuthbertson, my supervisor, was outstanding. I was very fortunate. He was my supervisor for both my master's and my PhD. So yeah, of course, no, I didn't have any problems with the others.
I know that when you get a PhD, sir, you have to defend it. I don't know if it's the same with you, Nisa, but I've known quite a few people who was not looking forward to that, and others were really looking forward to that. But it's daunting. It's really daunting.
It does depend on how the PhD is done, and what is entailed, because not all PhDs are just a thesis. Mine was a research thesis that I did. What they did in my case was I had 4 examiners. No, for my master's I had 4 examiners. For my PhD I had 3 examiners. One was South African, one was Canadian, and one was British. I had to have none of the examiners were allowed to come from the university where I had studied. So UNISA could not provide an examiner. They had to come from other universities. And they had to be internationally recognized universities. So I got these, the Canadian examiner was also at a British university. So and they were all, the South African one was from Stellenbosch, and he was a professor at the military academy, and the other 2 were both historians who had a lot of credibility in the military history field. So the way that the examination went was they each took a copy of my thesis, and they each independently, not even aware of one another, each worked through it, and each wrote comments on it, and gave their opinion of that, and then said whether they thought this was worth a PhD or not. Because I had to reference it extensively. I mean, you can't say anything in a thesis like that without backing it up with a reference. Where did you get that? Otherwise, you've got to say, this is my opinion. And it's not referenced anywhere. But if you're talking about facts, then you have to back up those facts with references. And they were free to consult any reference that they wanted to. And in some cases, they certainly did that. And then that was all sent back to the supervisor. And then the supervisor would then submit that to the necessary authorities at the university, and the university would decide whether they're going to give it or not. So I didn't have to defend my thesis at all. In some ways, I regret that. I would have liked to, because if you've done your job properly, and I believe I did my job properly. It was a very carefully researched, and all 3 of the examiners said exactly that. They said it was well researched. And if you've done that well, then you should be able to justify what you've said in your degree. So.
No, you're right about that, sir. Highest standard as possible. That's a great thing. But I've got a last question for you. While you
Yes.
were talking the last few hours, I was thinking to myself that the Army really put a lot of coursework and time into its officers. It seemed to me that the officers were very well trained. And also that the paratroopers are expected to do more. They just are expected to go above and beyond. Would that be true, sir?
Of course, it is true, in the sense that the Army invested a great deal, the South African Army, in their officers. There was a lot expected from them. It's also true that the paratroopers did find themselves doing additional courses. They weren't always necessary for their promotion, but they were certainly necessary for them within the paratrooper context. So there was a bit more expected of them to be a specialist officer. I think it would perhaps not be true to say that they were better trained than any other officers. I think in some cases they were certainly better motivated because it was demanding. I remember being on course at the infantry school on one occasion when I managed to get 2 days leave from at the end of the course, and I brought my wife and children down from Bloemfontein, and we went to Buffels Bay, which is not so far from Oudtshoorn. And we had a short 2-day holiday there. It might have been 3 days, I can't remember. But in any case, and then we went back to Bloemfontein, and then the pressure was back on again. And I remember on the course, I think it was our Mortar Course, with me was an officer from 32 Battalion, and then there were a number of officers from other units. And when I got the results of my application for leave, and they said, yes, you can have your leave, because I had to do that through Bloemfontein. I was so happy, you know. I said to the guys who were around me, I said, yeah, my leave's been approved, you know, yeah. And one of the guys from one of the other units, I think he was from the State President's Guard, he said to me, what do you mean your leave's been approved? Don't you get leave after a course like this? Don't you automatically get leave? I said, no, no way. So he said, oh. He said, but was there a chance that you wouldn't have had it approved? So I said, yeah, there's a very big chance that it wouldn't be approved. Leave is a privilege. It's not a right. I'm grateful for any leave I can get. And he said, but that's crazy. Surely they don't do that. And the guy from 32 Battalion started laughing. Charles Miller, he was later killed in action. He said, Boetie, jy verstaan nie. Said to him, Sonny, you don't understand. You know, I mean, they were the same age, but he was just being a bit facetious there. He said to him, Sonny, you don't understand. He said, in units like ours, you learn to appreciate your leave. It doesn't come automatically. You've got to be grateful if you get leave. And this guy, I mean, who was an infantryman, he just shook his head. He just couldn't understand that this. And he said to us, "There's no way I would serve in a unit like that. No way I would allow that sort of interference in my life." So, you know, I never served in another infantry unit than the paratroops in my regimental time. So I can't tell you, but it appeared to me there that you know, it was quite clear that Charles was highly motivated from 32 Battalion. And I was highly motivated. We weren't in the same category as this guy, who was thinking of self and not about the bigger picture. So I suppose to a certain extent that does apply. You know, one has to remember that with Army officers, they have to go through the initial training as to become an officer. I mean, everybody does the basic training and the basic infantry training. But then an officer has to go through formative training. And then once he's qualified, then he will get commissioned. And then if he wants to get further promotion, he has to do courses in mortars. He has to do courses in anti-tank. He has to do courses in medium machine gun. I'm talking about way back in those days. Medium machine gun went out a long time ago, but that was the Vickers machine gun. He has to do courses in counterinsurgency. He has to do courses as not just as a platoon commander, but as an administration of a company 2IC's course. And then he has to go on to doing a combat team commander's course, which is at company level, a reinforced company level, where it's a company plus other elements that are attached to the company. And these are courses that will none of these courses are less than 6 weeks. And some of them will be 3 months, 4 months. So it's a lot of courses with a lot of time taken up to do these courses. And all these courses have a practical side to them. So you're doing theory, but you're also doing practical. And in fact, when you finish these courses, you are qualified as an instructor in that course. That's what it boils down to. So by the time the permanent force officer gets to the level of a captain or a major, he's qualified to be a anti-tank platoon commander, a mortar platoon commander, a machine gun platoon commander. He's qualified to be a rifle platoon commander. He's qualified to be a rifle company commander. Each of these has their own demands, and he's got to be qualified in that. And that's why I sometimes get a little impatient with people who say, yeah, but the citizen force they did exactly the same courses as you. They did the same. And I'm not decrying the citizen force, because in the citizen force, if you're going to be the anti-tank commander, platoon commander, then you do an anti-tank platoon commander course, and then you become the anti-tank platoon commander. But you don't have to also do a mortar platoon course, because you're not going to become a mortar platoon commander. But in the permanent force, you have to be prepared to act in any of those capacities. You have to be ready to be appointed in any of those capacities. And you have to be ready to instruct in those capacities. And that's why the permanent force course was invariably a lot longer than the citizen force course in the same sort of thing. Because a citizen force guy had to actually apply that he had to be that platoon commander, the anti-tank platoon commander. But the permanent force guy, he had to be able to instruct people as anti-tank platoon commanders. And that made the difference. So for a permanent force guy, there was a heavy load on your shoulders to get qualified. And if you were a paratrooper, you were expected to also qualify as a dispatcher. And if you had any aspirations to going into the parachute training field and perhaps becoming commander of the parachute training center, then you need to also, then you need to also do the parachute instructor's course. And if you were interested in going into something like the Pathfinders, then you had to do a free fall course and a halo course and those sort of things. So there were all sorts of additional things that you had to do. So really, by the time an infantry officer who's a paratrooper and who served in the parachute unit graduates to the point where he becomes a battalion commander, he's certainly one of the most highly qualified infantry officers in the Defence Force. That's just the way it works. It's just the Defence Force. You had other little things you had to do. Before you became a captain, you had to do a law course in military law. If you went to the military academy, then you did law as one of your subjects, military law as one of your subjects at the academy. But if not, you had to go and do a special military law course in Pretoria, that was present, and you had to pass that before you were promoted to captain, because a captain had to be able to serve on a court martial. He had to be able to conduct summary trials. Now those things don't exist anymore in the new setup, but in those days, a captain who was a company commander was given the necessary authority, and he was expected to conduct summary trials and to sentence guys. You could send guys to DB or to CB or various other things. So, and you had to have the knowledge to be able to do that. So you had to prepare your officers for all of these things, and it was quite a demanding situation to go through all of that. It placed a lot of pressure, and that's why you found that many guys who joined permanent force, they stayed as officers until maybe to the rank of captain, and then they said all these courses, and then they would resign and leave. It just became too much, because every permanent force infantry officer was expected to be an instructor too. That wasn't necessary in the citizen force. It was useful in the citizen force, but it wasn't necessary. That the permanent force were the ones who were supposed to train the citizen force, and they were supposed to train the permanent force themselves. So every officer in the permanent force was an instructor in every field that his corps was involved in. And if you were in the paratroops, it was an additional field that came in. So I think you're quite right. The South African Army officer, regular Army officer, permanent force officer, was highly qualified. I'm not saying that they were all good. Some of them were probably not very, very good. But they were highly qualified, and those that were serious about their profession, they were good. Certainly the ones that I worked with, the instructors that I had at the infantry school were outstanding NCOs and officers. They were absolutely outstanding, really good. The instructors I had at one Parachute Battalion were, I think, amongst the best in the world when it comes to parachute instruction. Some of the best in the world, really. I believe so. And I've worked with paratroopers from other countries as well, and I've seen how other countries conduct their parachute training and what their drills are like in the aircraft, in the air, on the ground, how they do their things. And I say without any hesitation, the South African parachute instructors amongst the best in the world.
Well, I can tell you, sir, we can sit here talking for many hours still, and we're going to, but not right now, not today. I was just also curious, sir, when the Israelis, we have these mass air assault helicopters of them. It reminded me of the air cavalry in Vietnam. I'm wondering if they got the idea from there, to come in, land, put the waves down, move out.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
That's a very interesting point, because why I say that is because very few people know that the Israelis carried out the first ever battalion-sized helicopter assault at night. The first one. The Americans had never even dreamt about it to that stage, so they were still working on it. We're talking about during the 6-Day War now. 1960, was that 66 or 67?
67, I think so.
67, I think it was, yeah. But they carried out an attack, and that was so successful that it formed the basis of their Pathfinder training, because dealing with so many helicopters in the air at night at low level, it's anything can go wrong, and many things do go wrong, and that's why their Pathfinders focus so much on helicopter operations at night. And what they did in the 6-Day War is they put the helicopters behind the artillery gun lines, and they were able to attack the artillery, and through that they were able to enable the armored forces to get past the particular area where that took place. So it was an exceptional operation. It was very innovative. It was the first time something like that had ever been done. And I would say, rather than saying that did the Israelis learn some things from the Americans, I would say, it's possible the Americans had to learn a few things from the Israelis when it came to that. In those days, the Israelis still used the Super Freelon helicopters, which were very effective in Israel because it's at sea level. The Super Freelon works very well at sea level. In our operations up in Novemberland, the altitude was too high and the helicopters they didn't come up to scratch over there because they couldn't operate at high altitude, whereas the Pumas could. But the Israelis, they understood helicopters. They could work very well with helicopters. But again, a smaller organization like the Israeli Defense Force, as opposed to the United States Army, it's always easier to work with these sort of things and to develop these sort of things. But that wasn't an air cavalry operation, and I don't think the Israelis have really cottoned on to the air cavalry, air assault type of operation that the Americans have done. I think the intensity of the the weaponry that is deployed around Israel makes helicopters very vulnerable. Unless you're doing something at night at very low level, and under certain conditions, it makes it very, very difficult to carry.
Well, Internet, we've come to the end of this episode, unfortunately. As I said to the General here, I can sit here talking for hours and hours still, and I will, but that's a nice thing. But sir, thank you for your time. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your life and your brain, sir, your intellectual capacity, your fast. It's fascinating. It's astonishingly good. Thank you for that, sir. And to the rest of you, you were not unimportant. Don't let anybody tell you that nonsense. You served well. And if you could see the General now, he's nodding his head. You served well. If you have a story, please come and tell me. Come, don't be afraid. Come and tell me. Just contact me. I'll get back to you. So until we meet again, God bless.